Ethan Crow opened his eyes and didn't recognize the ceiling. Stone arches loomed overhead. The air smelled of wax and someone else's sweat. A stranger's memories exploded in his head. 23 years of beatings and spitting came flooding back all at once. His mother, a servant, had died in childbirth. His father, the Duke, had never once called him by name. His younger brother would slip broken glass into his boots. The servants would urinate in his porridge and not even bother to hide it. 23 years in the body of a man whom the entire household hated. Ethan sat up in bed and clenched his temples. He remembered the cornfields of Iowa. He remembered the taste of coffee from his at a gas station. He remembered falling asleep at the wheel at 3 a.m, and the headlights of an oncoming truck were the last thing he saw. And now he was sitting in a stone room the size of a closet, with 2 people living inside his skull at the same time. A former agricultural researcher and the unloved bastard of the ducal house. Ethan Wright and Ethan Crow. One name for 2 people. A funny coincidence. Or perhaps not a coincidence. He didn't have time to think about it because the door swung open and a soldier in a coat of arms adorned cloak entered. The soldier didn't bow. He didn't even look him in the eye. He flung a scroll onto the floor and said that his lordship was expected in the great hall in an hour. He uttered the word, his lordship, as if he were spitting out a rotten tooth. And Tan picked up the scroll. The seal of Duke Crow. A heavy red wax blob bearing a coat of arms depicting a raven on an oak tree. He broke the seal and read it. The text was brief. Today, the matter of the division of the northern lands will be decided. The presence of all family members is mandatory. Ethan reread it twice. A distant memory told him that the northern lands were the northern wasteland, a patch of dead clay on the edge of the kingdom where nothing grows but lichen, land that even the peasants called cursed. Ethan stood up and walked over to the copper mirror on the wall. The face staring back at him was a stranger's. Sharp cheekbones, dark circles under his eyes, the gaunt body of a man who'd been fed scraps. But his hands. Ethan looked at his hands. Long fingers, calluses on his fingertips from the earth, not from a sword. The hands of a farmer. He smirked. Even in this world, his body had chosen the land over weapons. The great hall turned exactly as his borrowed memory had suggested. 300 nobles seated on stone benches arranged in an amphitheater, tapestries depicting battles, each 300 years old, stained glass windows in which the heroes of Vallenheim vanquished demons and monsters, and in the center, on a dais, Duke Crow, father, a man with a face carved from an old oak tree, eyes like 2 gray stones, not a single wrinkle from laughter, only from contempt. Cassian sat next to him, the younger brother, 19 years old, golden hair, a smile that made the maids drop their trays. Father's favorite, the court's favorite, the favorite of everyone who had eyes but no brains. Cassian was the first to notice Ethan, and his smile widened. It was the smile of a cat that had spotted a mouse cornered with no way out. Ethan walked across the hall. 300 pairs of eyes followed him. Someone snorted. Someone whispered the word sloth. Whoever didn't bother whispering and said it out loud. Ethan stopped in front of the dais. The Duke didn't look up. He was reading some document, or pretending to read it. The pause lasted just long enough for everyone in the hall to realize who the trash was here. Then the Duke spoke. His voice was even, without malice, without warmth, like reading the sentence of a horse they'd decided to shoot. He said that the northern wasteland was being transferred to Ethan Crow, that the bastard was receiving the land and the title of junior lord, that this was the last thing the Crow family would ever do for him. Cassian stood up and added his own comment. He said that if the land would accept such a slacker, then the gods must have gone blind. The hall burst into laughter. 300 gulps. The laughter hit him like a slap in the face. Ethan stood there, staring at his father. The Duke never once looked up. 23 years. Not once. And then a voice sounded in Ethan's head. Quiet. Calm. Feminine. emotionless. The voice said that initialization was complete. The Chronos farm was activated. External time, 1 hour. Internal time, 1 year. Compatibility with the host, 98%. Ethan blinked. A translucent panel flashed before his eyes, green lines of text against the backdrop of the hall. Status. Level 1. Earth, 0 acres external, 1 acre internal. Recognition points, 0. Accumulated internal time, 0. Next objective, survive. No one in the hall saw the panel. No one heard the voice. The laughter continued. Cassian savored the moment. The Duke was signing the papers, and Ethan Crow, for the first time in the 23 years of this body's life, smiled. Truly. Not like a beaten dog that had been thrown a bone. Like an agronomist who had just been given a clean field and complete freedom. He bowed. He took the deed transferring the land. He turned his back on the hall and walked out. Behind him, the laughter died down. One of the nobles said the bastard had completely lost his mind, smiling when they're kicking him out. Another replied that one shouldn't expect anything but stupidity from a maid's son. Ethan walked down the hallway, reading the display panel. Chronos farm, pocket dimension, acceleration ratio, 1 to 8,760. 1 hour outside equals 1 year inside. Current size, 1 acre. Soil category, A. Water source, 1 spring. Temperature, stable. Slots for living guests, 0. Recognition system active. Source of reaction points from external observers. He finished reading and stopped. Restrictions. All living things age inside according to internal time. Introducing living beings requires their consent. Death inside is irreversible. The host is not subject to accelerated aging. Reason unknown. He reread the last point 3 times. The host does not age. Everyone else does. Only he does not. This was not just an ability. It was a trap. Or a gift. Or a curse. He didn't know yet. A wagon was waiting for him in the courtyard. Just one. The shabbiest one on the entire estate. Crooked wheels. A lame horse. Inside the wagon lay a single sack of turnips and a rusty axe, a gift from his loving family. The driver was an old man with a sour expression. He looked at Ethan and said it would take 2 days to reach the northern wasteland, if the horse didn't die along the way. Ethan tossed his only bag of clothes into the wagon and sat down next to the turnips. The wagon set off. The estate gates closed behind him. Not a single servant came out to say goodbye. Not a single window opened. Only Cassian stood on the 3rd-floor balcony waving his hand. The farewell gesture was mockingly slow. Ethan didn't turn around. He stared straight ahead at the road and counted in his head. 90 days until the bloody review. Every lord is required to field 100 fighters of at least level 30. Failure means execution and the forfeiture of one's lands. He had 0 fighters, 0 weapons, 0 gold. 1 lame horse, a sack of turnips, and a pocket dimension where 1 hour equals 1 year. Ethan closed his eyes and began to formulate a plan. First, get to the wasteland. Second, enter the farm. Third, plant the first seed. Fourth, figure out why the hell the quiet female voice in his head sounded as if it had been waiting for him for a very long time. The journey took 2 days. The horse didn't die, but it tried twice. The coachman didn't say a word in 2 days except a curse at the horse. The landscape changed with every hour as they traveled north. Green fields gave way to a brown steppe. The steppe gave way to a rocky plain. The trees disappeared. The grass disappeared. Only the wind and the gray sky remained. On the morning of the 2nd day, Ethan saw his land, the northern wasteland. A bare, rocky hill in the middle of nowhere. No trees, no water, no buildings. Only cracked clay stretching to the horizon, and the remains of a stone foundation at the top of the hill. The driver stopped the wagon and said he wouldn't go any further. Ethan jumped down. The wind hit his face, cold, dry, with a hint of dust. He walked to the edge of the hill and crouched down. He scooped up a handful of soil. He rubbed it between his fingers. Clay mixed with lime. pH around 8. Nitrogen at 0. Organic matter at 0. To an ordinary person, this was dead soil. To a research agronomist who had defended his doctoral thesis on controlled evolution in isolated biomes, it was a blank slate. The world had been turned upside down. 1 second, Ethan was standing on a rocky hill under a gray sky. The next second, he was standing on black soil under a sky that was too blue. The Kronos farm. 1 acre. A perfect square of fertile soil bounded by a translucent wall of shimmering light. Beyond the wall, nothing. A white void, like an empty file. In the center of the acre, a small spring bubbled up. The water was icy and clear. Ethan dropped to his knees and plunged his hands into the earth. Black soil. The real thing. Deep. At least 1.5 meters of fertile topsoil. He scooped up a handful and brought it to his face. The scent of the forest after rain. The scent of life. In the 23 years he'd been in this body, and the 31 years of his past life, he'd never held soil like this in his hands. A voice in his head announced that the Category A soil was ready for any type of crop. The internal temperature was stable at 22 degrees. Precipitation was adjustable. The day-night cycle was 12 to 12. Internal time had been activated. Ethan stood up and looked around. 1 acre was roughly 4,000 square meters. For one person, that was more than enough. For an army, it's laughable. But the system said the farm could be expanded using recognition points, and those points trickle in from people's reactions on the outside. So first, he needed to grow something impossible. Then show it to someone. Then gauge their reaction. Then expand the farm. Then repeat. He pulled seeds out of his pockets, a turnip from the sack, a handful of wheat he'd scooped out of a crack in the wagon, 3 mint seeds he'd found on the side of the road and stuffed into his pocket out of habit. An agronomist never walks past seeds. It's a reflex. Ethan set to work, with his hands, without tools. He laid out the plot, mentally dividing the acre into zones. 1/4 for grains, 1/4 for root vegetables, 1/4 for herbs and spices, 1/4 for experiments. The classic layout he'd used in the university greenhouses. Only the greenhouse had been the size of a room, and here he had a whole acre. He dug furrows with his fingers. He planted the wheat in rows, spacing them a palm's width apart. He assigned the turnips to the root vegetable zone. He planted the mint separately by the spring because mint loves moisture, and if left unchecked, it will take over everything. He knew this from his past life. Mint is a green invader. Give it free rein, and in a year you won't have a garden but a field of mint. Then he sat down by the spring and waited. About 7 minutes passed outside. Inside, a month went by. The wheat sprouted. Green shoots pierced the black soil and stretched toward the sky, which was almost too blue. Ethan watched over them as if they were his own children. He checked each sprout, height, leaf color, stem thickness. The farmer's dashboard displayed the characteristics of each plant. Common wheat, height, 2 centimeters, health, 100%, yield forecast, average, time until harvest, 11 months, average yield. Ethan frowned. In his past life, he had spent 6 years developing a wheat variety with a yield 40% higher than the standard. Here, he had no laboratory, no genetic markers, not even scissors for selection. But he had time. Endless time. He began the selection process. From 30 wheat sprouts, he chose the 5 best in terms of height and stem thickness. He pulled out the rest. Cruel, but necessary. Breeding is cruelty for the sake of results. The 5 best produced seeds after 4 months inside. He collected the seeds and planted them again. From the new generation, he selected the best once more, and again, and again. 3 internal years for the first acre. Just over 20 minutes had passed on the outside. In those 3 years, He accomplished what an ordinary Wallenheim farmer would have done over 3 generations. He bred a wheat variety with kernels twice the standard size. The ear was golden and heavy. The display showed a yield 85% higher. Health, 100%. High cold tolerance. Ethan named the variety First Leaf, simply because it was his first result in the New World. The turnips exceeded expectations. The farm's soil was so perfect that the root vegetables grew to the size of a child's head. Sweet, firm. The display panel showed a nutritional value 3 times higher than that of standard Wallenheim turnips. But the real surprise was the mint. The mint on the farm grew like crazy. In 2 in-world years, the bush by the spring had grown to human height. The leaves were dark green and thick. The scent hit your nose from 10 steps away. The display panel showed characteristics that Ethan had never seen before. Mutated peppermint. Medicinal effects detected. Fatigue relief. Accelerated healing of minor wounds. Calming effect. Category: rare ingredient. Value on the external market undetermined. Ethan plucked a leaf and steeped it in the spring water. The taste hit his tongue like an electric shock. Mint from this world, grown in ideal soil with accelerated evolution, had become something more than just a herb. It had become a medicine. He left the farm. About 3.5 hours had passed outside. The sun had shifted toward the west. The wind still stung his face. The wasteland was still as dead and gray as ever. But in his pocket lay seeds of wheat that didn't exist in this world, and a bunch of mint that could heal wounds. Ethan looked at the wasteland and made a decision. He needed a harvest from the outside, something he could show, something that would make the inspector would choke on his own smirk. He chose 2 acres of land on the outskirts, south of the hill. Clay and lime, pH 8, dead ground. Any local farmer would have looked at this land and spat on it. Ethan didn't spit. He got to work. A compost pit. That was the first thing he dug. He cut open a turnip from the sack and put it in the pit along with some grass he'd pulled up from the roadside. He added ash from a campfire. He added his own urine because nitrogen is nitrogen, both in this world and in the past. A day later, the pit started working. 2 days later, he had primitive but usable compost. He mixed it into the clay. He stirred it. He watered it with water he'd carried from the nearest stream 1/2 kilometer away. And he planted the seeds of the first leaf. Wheat from the farm, with a yield 85% above average, planted in compost-enriched soil on a barren wasteland. There was no time acceleration here. Everything grew normally here. But the seeds were no ordinary seeds. 2 days of external time later, the wheat sprouted. Green shoots on barren clay. By the 3rd day, the shoots had grown to the length of a palm. By the 4th day, the wheat stood knee-high, golden, heavy, impossible. Ethan stood at the edge of the field and watched. 2 acres of golden wheat on land where nothing had grown 3 days ago. The panel flashed. A system notification. An external observer detected. Distance, 2 kilometers. Approaching. Ethan turned toward the south. A cloud of dust was rising on the horizon. A rider. Alone. Ethan squinted. The cloud was approaching quickly. The rider was urging his horse on. Behind him, a second horse, laden with bales, was being led along on a lead rope. The inspector. 3 days. His father had sent an inspector 3 days later. Ethan smiled. He'd been expecting this. He went into the farm, picked some mint, boiled some water, brewed some tea, went outside, set his mug on a flat rock by the road, and sat down to wait. Inspector Rowland arrived 40 minutes later. Short, round, with the face of a man who'd spent 20 years living off sycophancy and petty bribes. The Crow family's crested cloak hung on him like a saddle on a pig. He dismounted with a crooked smile. His eyes darted across the wasteland, searching for what he expected to see. Bare earth. A starving bastard. A dead end. Instead, he saw 2 acres of wheat in ear. The smile faded from his face. He blinked, looked again. The wheat hadn't disappeared. Rowland opened his mouth. closed it, opened it again. His face went through 3 stages: disbelief, shock, fear. He asked how this was possible. 3 days, on barren land, 2 acres. Ethan handed him a mug of tea. He said the journey had been long and that the inspector should have a drink and rest. Roland took the mug automatically. He took a sip, and his eyes widened even more. The mint tea washed over his body like a wave of warm water. The fatigue from the 2-day journey evaporated in seconds. The pain in his lower back from the saddle vanished. Roland looked at the mug, then at Ethan, then at the wheat, then back at the mug. The panel before Ethan's eyes flashed green. An outside observer's reaction. Category: shock and disbelief. Plus 85 recognition points. Unlocked. 1 slot for a living guest. Ethan finished his tea. Roland left 2 hours later. He hadn't said a word the entire time. He just sat on a rock, drinking tea, looking at the wheat, and trying to figure out how to write a report explaining to the Duke that his bastard son had accomplished in 3 days what the kingdom's best agronomists couldn't do in 3 years. When the dust from his horse's hooves faded on the horizon, Ethan looked at the panel. 85 recognition points. Ethan had made turnip soup, plain soup, water from the stream, turnips from a sack, a pinch of salt he'd found in the pocket of his travel jacket. No magic, no rare ingredients. But he added a single mint leaf from the farm. Seora sat by the fire, holding the bowl with both hands. She ate slowly, not because she didn't want to eat. It was because she was used to the fact that food could run out at any moment. Ethan watched her and read the panel. Seora Kim, daughter of General Kim Tae-han, executed 6 years ago for the loss of Randall Fortress on the eastern border. After her father's execution, she was stripped of her status. Her property was confiscated. She drifted from one mercenary unit to another. Her last unit was disbanded 3 months ago. Since then, she had been walking across half the kingdom. She finished her soup. She set the bowl down on a rock. She looked at Ethan and said the soup was good. Ethan nodded. Then he asked her a question. He asked how long it would take her to become captain of a unit of 100 fighters. Sora's expression didn't change. She replied that under normal conditions, it would take 10 years. Under good conditions, 5. Under ideal conditions, 3. Ethan was silent for a moment. Then he said he had a proposal. 1 year of training in exchange for 1 hour of outside time. She'd be able to train and grow as much as she needed to. Meanwhile, the hours would pass on the outside. Sora looked at him for a long time. Her face showed no emotion, but her fingers clenched the hem of her jacket. She asked what the cost would be. Ethan told her the truth. Time inside is real. A year of training is a year of life. She'd enter at 22. She'll come out 23, or 25, or 32. It depends on how much time she needs. The years won't come back. The wrinkles will remain. The aging is real. Seora didn't hesitate for a second. She said she agreed. Ethan blinked. He'd expected questions, doubts, maybe fear. But Seora simply stood up and asked where to go. He led her to the farm's entry point. The air in front of them shimmered like a mirage over hot stone. Ethan activated the slot. The panel confirmed. Guest number 1, Seora Kim. Consent received. Entry granted. They entered together. Seora stopped after taking her first step. She stood on the black earth beneath a perfectly blue sky, and her eyes widened. For the first time all evening, her face showed emotion. Not fear, not surprise. Hunger. The hunger of a person who had seen an opportunity. Ethan showed her the territory. 1 acre, a spring, fields of wheat, a mint bush by the water, and an empty patch where she could train. Seora surveyed the area. She drew her sword, assumed a fighting stance, and began. Ethan didn't interfere. He returned to the garden beds and continued his work. Inside the farm, he could do what he did best: grow, improve, optimize. While Siora practiced her strikes, he developed a second generation of turnips with a higher nutrient content. While she ran laps around the perimeter of the acre, he crossed the mint with wild thyme that had sprouted on its own at the far edge of the farm. The result was intriguing, a hybrid herb that, when brewed, produced a mild analgesic effect. The panel classified it as a rare medicinal ingredient in Category B. An internal month passed. Siora rose from level 6 to level 9. She trained 14 hours a day. She slept 6. She ate what Ethan grew. She drank mint tea after every training session. The restorative effect allowed her to train without injury. Without the mint, she would have worn herself out in a week. With the mint, she was a machine. Ethan watched and took notes, not in a notebook but in his head. An agronomist was used to tracking growth, no matter what it was: wheat, people. The principle was the same. Conditions determine the result. Give the right soil and the right nourishment, and any seed will blossom. The third internal month had passed, level 12. Siora had stopped gasping for breath after hour-long sparring sessions with her shadow. Her strikes had become more precise, more economical. She had stopped wasting energy on wide, swinging motions. Ethan noticed this not because he was an expert in combat. He noticed because he understood efficiency. A plant that wastes energy on extra leaves bears less fruit. A fighter who wastes energy on unnecessary movements tires faster. One principle. He told her this. She looked at him strangely. Then she nodded. The next day, her style changed. Her movements became shorter, sharper, without a single unnecessary breath. After 6 internal months, Siora reached level 15. The panel showed discipline at 71. Loyalty to the owner at plus 320. Ethan hadn't asked for loyalty. He simply left a mug of mint tea and a plate of first-leaf wheat bread by her bed every morning. Every Sunday, according to internal time, he didn't work in the fields but sat by the spring and told her things. Not about himself, about the world, about how the soil works, why some seeds yield a harvest while others rot, how to tell from the color of a leaf what a plant is lacking. She listened in silence. Sometimes she asked questions, short ones, precise, like blows. After 9 internal months, she called him by name for the first time. Not my lord, not master, Ethan. He noted this on the panel. Favorability plus 10. A year later, she reached level 18. Ethan decided the first stage was sufficient. They needed to go out, to find out what was happening outside, to earn recognition points to expand the farm. They went out. 1 hour and 4 minutes passed outside. The sun had barely set. The bonfire was still smoldering. The soup bowl sat on a rock. But Siora was different. The year had changed her. Her shoulders were broader. Her arms were stronger. Her gaze was deeper. She looked 23. 1 year, given voluntarily, and worth every second. Ethan looked at the panel. Siora Kim, age 23, level 18, class, veteran swordswoman, H, health, 98%, loyalty to owner, plus 450, discipline, 78. From level 6 to 18 in 1 hour outside. That was just the beginning. But it was enough for the next step. For the next 3 days, Ethan worked outside, expanding the crops. The second batch of first-leaf wheat took up another 2 acres east of the hill. The compost from the first pit had already matured. He mixed it with clay and got some workable soil. Not perfect, but good enough. Siora helped, silently, no questions asked. She hauled water from the stream. She dug furrows. She did exactly what Ethan told her to do, precisely, and without any unnecessary movements. On the 4th day after leaving the farm, a second wagon pulled up to the wasteland. Ethan was expecting guests, but not these ones. 5 peasants sat in the wagon, 3 men and 2 women. The eldest introduced himself as Bran. He said they were from the village of Holmovaya, 40 kilometers to the south. They'd heard from a traveling merchant that someone had grown wheat on the wasteland. They didn't believe it. They came to see for themselves. Ethan led them through the fields. 4 acres of golden wheat in full ear, on land where nothing had been growing just a week ago. Bran touched an ear of wheat. He rubbed the grain between his fingers. He sniffed it. His face went through the same stages as Inspector Rowland's. Disbelief, shock. But then, instead of fear, something else took hold. Hope. Bran asked if he could buy some seeds. Ethan said the seeds weren't for sale, but if they wanted to work on his land, he'd give them seeds and teach them how to plant. They exchanged glances. The older woman asked what the pay would be. Ethan replied that the pay would be food and lodging. He would build houses. He would give them land. He would show them how to grow crops. In return, they would work his fields and pay a tithe, 10% of the harvest. That was ridiculously little. A typical lord took between 30 and 50%. 10% sounded like a joke. But Ethan wasn't joking. He didn't need their wheat. He needed their eyes, their amazement, their stories in the taverns. Every peasant is a walking generator of recognition points. The panel confirmed it. The reaction of the group of outside observers. Category: hope and distrust. Plus 120 recognition points. Total score: 205. The cost of expanding the farm to 2 acres is 100 points. The cost of expanding to 3 acres is 250. The cost of a second guest slot is 300. Ethan spent 100 points. The farm expanded to 2 acres. He could feel it. Inside, the world felt bigger. The second acre joined the first. New land, new possibilities. 5 more farmers, another village that had heard the rumors. Then a merchant brought 2 carpenters who were looking for work. Ethan put them to work building barracks. The wasteland was coming to life. Slowly, 1 person at a time. Each new person brought points. Each new point expanded the farm. Each new acre of the farm provided new resources. The flywheel began to turn. On the 14th day after arriving at the wasteland, Ethan stood atop a hill and counted. 6 acres of wheat outside, 3 acres of the farm inside, 12 farmers working in the fields, 2 carpenters building the first barracks, 1 level 18 Siora, and 1 figure on the road from the south, small, with a large bag slung over her shoulder, and a notepad in her hand. Hanaso arrived exactly as he had expected, with curiosity in her eyes and lies on her tongue. Hanaso was small. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. She barely reached his shoulder. The bag slung over her shoulder was bigger than she was. She held the notebook in her left hand. Her left hand. Ethan noticed this right away. At the Royal Academy of Valenheim, students were required to write with their left hand. An old tradition. The right hand for the sword, the left for the pen. Anyone who studied at the academy wrote with her left hand. Hana introduced herself as a traveler. She said she was heading north to study mountain herbs. She said she'd heard about a strange farmer and decided to stop by. Her voice was clear and quick. She talked a lot. Too much for a spy. But that was exactly what made her a good spy. People don't suspect the talkative ones. Ethan smiled. He said he was glad to have a guest. He said she could stay as long as she wanted. And he added 1 sentence that made Hana turn pale. He said that since she wrote with her left hand, she must be from the Royal Academy, because that's how they teach there. Hana froze. The notebook in her hand trembled. Her eyes widened. Her mouth fell open slightly. She looked like a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar. The panel displayed Hana So, age 19, level 3, class, apprentice herbalist, health, 92%, loyalty, neutral. Secret mission, to report on Ethan Crow's activities to the Royal Chancellery. Ethan didn't expose her any further. He simply told her she should stay and write the truth, because the truth here is more interesting than any lie. Hana stood there, blushing to her ears. Then she exhaled and began to write. She wrote everything down: the wheat, the size of the grains, the color of the ears, the height of the stalks, the scent of mint from the spring, the number of peasants in the fields, the length of the furrows, the growth rate. Ethan gave her freedom to move throughout the wasteland. The only place he wouldn't let her go was the farm. Not yet, anyway. She had to earn his trust. For the first 3 days, Kana behaved like a researcher on a new planet. She touched every ear of wheat. She sniffed every leaf. She recorded the air temperature using an old mercury thermometer she carried in her bag. She tasted the soil. Ethan watched her and didn't see a spy. He saw a scientist, a real one. Someone who looks at the world and wants to understand it, not exploit it. On the 4th day, she approached him in the evening. They were sitting by the campfire. Siora was cleaning her sword off to the side. Hana asked how he'd grown mint that big. Ethan answered honestly. He said it was all about the soil. Fertile soil gives a plant the chance to reach its full potential. The same mint in poor soil would be ordinary. In ideal soil, it becomes something greater. Hana wrote it down. Then she looked up and asked how he knew such things. She said that not a single textbook at the academy described the connection between soil quality and the medicinal properties of herbs. Ethan paused. He couldn't tell her about Iowa, about the university, about his PhD in guided evolution. He said he'd been thinking a lot and observed a lot. Hana looked at him for a long time. Then she said quietly that he was lying, but she didn't press the issue. She went back to her notebook. A week after Hana's arrival, what Ethan had both expected and feared happened. On the night of the 20th day after their arrival at the wasteland, horsemen rode up to the border of his lands. 20 men, light armor, no coats of arms, mercenaries. Siora woke Ethan before dawn. She said she'd seen campfires behind the southern hill. 20 fires, 20 horses, armed. Ethan wasn't surprised. Cassian, his dear little brother. Inspector Roland had returned and reported on the wheat. Cassian couldn't allow the bastard to succeed. If Ethan succeeded on the wasteland, it would undermine the Golden Child's position, so the bastard had to fail, or die. Ethan looked at Siora. Level 18, 1, against 20 mercenaries. That wasn't enough. He needed more. He made his decision in 3 seconds. He told Siora that she needed to enter the farm one more time. She looked at him. He said he needed at least level 25. That's another 7 levels. Inside, that's about 2 years of training. Outside, 15 minutes. But she'd come out 25 years old. Another 2 years of her life given to him. Siora didn't hesitate. She said that 2 years was nothing for the chance to finally kick someone's ass. It was the first joke he'd ever heard from her. They entered the farm. The 2 internal years passed both quickly and slowly at the same time. For Ethan, they were 2 years of work. He developed a new variety of medicinal herb. He expanded the wheat fields inside. He began an experiment with a rhizome he'd found at the edge of the 2nd acre. The rhizome grew strangely, downward instead of upward. The panel classified it as an unknown species. Ethan marked it for further study. For Siora, these were 2 years of fire. She trained with a fury that pounded the earth beneath her feet into stone. She carved her own training posts from wood that Ethan had grown specifically for this purpose. It was as hard as iron, with a density 4 times that of ordinary wood. She would break the posts. He grew new ones. By the end of her first internal year, she had reached level 22. By the end of a year and a half, level 24. By her 20th internal month, she had reached level 26. The panel displayed Siora Kim, age 25, level 26, discipline, 82, loyalty to the owner, plus 800, class, elite swordswoman. Every Sunday, according to internal time, Ethan brought her tea. He would sit down next to her by the spring. He remained silent. Sometimes he talked about his plans, about how many peasants had already arrived, about the rumors spreading, and about how there would be a review outside in 70 days, and he needed 100 fighters. She listened. She drank tea. Once, toward the end of the 2nd internal year, she said he was a strange lord. Ethan asked why. She said that any other lord would use the farm to grow gold or weapons, but he grows tea and wheat. Ethan replied that weapons rust, but wheat feeds people. She shook her head and said he didn't understand. She said he wasn't growing wheat, he was growing people. Ethan said nothing, because she was right. They left the farm. 14 minutes had passed outside. The mercenaries were still in camp behind the hill. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. Hana was sleeping in the barracks. The peasants hadn't woken up yet. Siora emerged from the farm a different person. 25 years old, 3 years inside in total. The body of a fighter. Hands calloused from the sword. Eyes that had seen more than any mercenary in that camp beyond the hill. Ethan gave her his only decent sword. Siora took it, weighed it in her hand, nodded, and set off toward the southern hill. Alone. Ethan didn't go with her. Not because he was afraid, because he knew. A gardener doesn't dig into the soil after sowing. He watches and waits. The mercenaries saw her and didn't take her seriously. A short woman in a light linen dress, without armor, with a single sword. Their commander laughed. He said the sloth had sent a snack instead of an army. 20 mercenaries formed a semicircle, confident, relaxed. That was a mistake. Siora moved like water over stones. The first 2 fell before they realized she was attacking. The third managed to raise his shield. She struck beneath the shield, at his knee. He collapsed. The 4th and 5th charged together. She stepped aside and sliced through the straps of their breastplates in a single motion. Their armor fell to the ground. They were left naked and terrified. The 6th ran. The 7th did too. The rest held out for another 20 seconds. 90 seconds. 20 mercenaries. Not a single one killed. Siora didn't kill. She maimed precisely and sparingly. Knees, wrists, armor straps. The commander was the last to remain. He stood with a sword in his trembling hands. Siora approached him. She knocked the sword from his grasp. She picked up his sword from the ground. She flung it at his feet and turned away. Ethan watched from the top of the hill. Peasants poured out of the barracks. Hana stood with a notepad pressed to her chest and her mouth agape. The panel lit up green. Reaction of multiple observers. Categories: shock, admiration, fear, impossibility, plus 400 recognition points. The farm's expansion to 5 acres has been unlocked. The cost was automatically deducted. Ethan felt the farm expand inside him. 5 acres, new land, new possibilities, new resources he hadn't yet had a chance to explore. Hana ran up to him. She was pale. Ethan spent the next 10 days in a mode this world had never seen before. He was recruiting. Not as a lord, not as a commander, as a farmer looking for workers to harvest the crops. Rumors of the wasteland spread through 4 villages within a 100-kilometer radius. Golden wheat on dead land. A female warrior who had taken down 20 mercenaries. A lord who takes a tithe of 10%. People came every day. At first, 2 or 3 at a time. Then 10. Peasants, runaway apprentices, deserters from garrisons who hadn't been paid their wages for 3 months, vagabonds, the desperate, the broken, people with nowhere else to go. These were exactly the kind of people Ethan needed. People with no ties, ready to do anything for a roof over their heads and a bowl of food. But not everyone was suited for the farm. Ethan was strict in his selection. The panel displayed each person's stats: level, health, potential, age. Age was critical. A 20-year-old could spend 10 internal years there and emerge as a 30-year-old fighter in his prime. A 35-year-old, after 10 years inside, would emerge as a 45-year-old, still combat-ready, but already with aching knees and slow reflexes. A 40-year-old, after 10 years, would be a 5-10-year veteran, experienced but frail. Every year counts. Every miscalculation means a life lost. Ethan selected the young ones, from 18 to 25, with a rank of at least second, with health at no less than 80%, with growth potential at least average. In the first week, he recruited 23 people, 12 from the village of Holmovaya, 6 runaway apprentices from the nearest town, Randvik, 4 deserters, 1 female blacksmith without tools. But the slots, The slots were a problem. The farm allowed only one guest at a time, one slot. That meant every fighter had to train separately. One entered, spent years there, left. The next one entered. With 100 fighters and 10 internal years each, that's 100 cycles of 10 years. 1,000 internal years. About 114 hours on the outside. Almost 5 days of non-stop work. But Ethan couldn't wait 5 days. He needed to expand the farm and unlock additional slots. The second slot cost 300 points. The third, 500. The fourth, 1,000. Each subsequent slot was more expensive than the previous one. Ethan did the math. 205 points had already been spent on the expansion. His current balance was 450. The second slot cost 300. After the purchase, he'd have 150 left. He bought the second slot. Now he could admit 2 people at the same time. He sent the first group on the 22nd day. 2 young farmers from Holmova. Darren, 19 years old, level 2. Mills, 21 years old, level 3. They entered the farm with wide eyes and trembling hands. Ethan explained the rules to them. Time inside is real. They would train, eat, sleep, aging. When they came out, hours would have passed outside. But for them, years would have passed, years that could never be recovered. Darren asked why he was doing this. Ethan answered honestly. In 68 days, the bloody review. Every lord must field 100 level 30 fighters. Ethan has none. If he doesn't field any, he'll be executed. If he's executed, the land will revert to the Duke. The peasants will lose everything, their fields, their 10% tithe, their hope. Darren was silent for a moment. Then he said that 10 years of his life were worth more than all the land in the wasteland. Ethan nodded. He agreed, and said he wasn't forcing him. Darren looked at the golden wheat beyond the farm's wall, at the black, fertile soil beneath his feet, at the sky, which was too blue, and he said he would enter, because nothing out there anyway. Mills said the same thing. They began training. Ciora taught them. She was their instructor, tough, ruthless, fair. She pushed them for 14 hours a day. Drill training, sword work, spear work, hand-to-hand combat, small group tactics. Everything she herself had learned over the course of 3 internal years was now being instilled in the 2 recruits. Ethan fed them first leaf wheat. He gave them mint tea to drink. The healing properties of mint sped up their recovery after training. Without mint, the recruits would have broken down within a month. With mint, they were able to endure Sora's regimen. After 5 internal years, Darren reached the 28th level. Mills reached the 26th. Darren was more talented. The panel rated his potential as high. Mills was average, but both were fighters, real ones, with calluses from the sword and the eyes of people who know the value of every day. They emerged. 34 minutes had passed outside. Darren emerged at 24, Mills at 26. 5 years each, given voluntarily. Ethan watched them and counted. 2 were ready. 98 remained. 66 days. He picked up the pace. He sent the next pair out an hour later. Then another pair. Then another. Sora hadn't left the farm for weeks of internal time. She trained batch after batch. Her own skill level grew through teaching. 28, 29, 30. Each new batch of cadets toughened her up. She was becoming more than just a fighter. She was becoming a commander. Ethan went in and out of the farm dozens of times a day. He brought in new seeds. He expanded the crops inside. Mint took up an entire corner of the second acre. Wheat fed the army of cadets. He grew a new type of root vegetable that the panel called the root of strength. A strange plant with crimson flesh that increased physical endurance for 12 hours after consumption. The side effect was an unpleasant taste, but the cadets ate it because they had no choice. Hana watched from outside. She saw people enter the spot at the top of the hill and disappear. Then they reappeared a few minutes later. But they were changed, older, tougher, with different eyes. She recorded everything: entry time, exit time, changes in appearance, the levels that Ethan sometimes voiced aloud. She didn't ask questions. Not because she didn't want to, because she was afraid of the answers. On the 35th day after arriving at the wasteland, Ethan had 42 trained fighters. The average level was 31. 15 of them were above 33. Darren led the pack with a level of 36 after 2 additional cycles at the farm. He was 29. 10 years of internal training for an hour and a half on the outside. He became a lieutenant in the first squad. Ciora reached level 32. Discipline, 85. Loyalty to the owner, plus 1,200. She was no longer a mercenary. She was a captain, a real one, with hundreds of internal years of command experience that no other officer in the kingdom possessed. Ethan unlocked the 3rd slot for 500 points. Now 3 people at once. Training speed tripled. On the 40th day, something happened he hadn't expected. In the middle of the night, Hana knocked on the door of his barracks. She stood in the doorway with a notepad pressed to her chest. Her eyes were red. Her hands were shaking. She said she knew what he was doing, that she'd seen it. People go in young and come out old. It's impossible. It defies every law of nature she knows. She asked what he was. Ethan looked at her, a little girl, 19 years old, with a notebook in her hands, her eyes red from crying. A spy who had forgotten she was a spy and had become just a frightened girl who had witnessed the impossible. He told the truth, partially. He said he had a place where time moved faster, that people inside lived through years in the time it took for minutes to pass on the outside, that this was his ability, that he didn't know where it came from, and that he needed these fighters to survive. Hannah listened in silence. Then she asked if she could go inside, not as a fighter, but as a scientist. She wanted to see this place, study the soil, understand how the mint was mutating, and figure out why the wheat was growing that way. Her voice trembled, but not from fear, from a thirst for knowledge. Ethan thought for 5 seconds. Then he nodded. He said he'd show her the farm, but not today, tomorrow, when she was ready. Hannah nodded. Then she did something he didn't expect. She opened her notebook, teared out the last 10 pages, held them out to him. He looked at them. It was her report, a detailed report for the Royal Chancellery. Dates, numbers, observations, everything she'd gathered over the past 2 weeks. She said it was his, that she wouldn't send it, that she'd chosen to stay here as a scientist, not as a spy. The panel lit up. The observer's reaction. Category, loyalty, plus 60 points. Hannah's favorability, plus 20. Ethan took the pages. He didn't read them. He put them in his pocket. And he said that tomorrow morning he would make her breakfast with fresh wheat and mint. She deserved it. Hannah smiled. For the first time since her arrival, it wasn't the polite smile of a traveler or the nervous smirk of a spy. It was the smile of a person who had finally found a place where her curiosity was not a punishment, but a gift. The next morning he took her to the farm. Hannah stepped onto the black earth beneath a sky that was too blue. She stopped, and she wept. Not out of fear, not out of surprise, out of awe at the beauty. 5 acres of perfect land, golden wheat, mint as tall as a person, a spring with crystal clear water, beds of the root of power, trees that Ethan had grown to serve as training poles, and the scent of living, fertile earth that hit her face like the wind. Hannah stood there, crying and writing at the same time. Her notebook was soaked with tears. Ethan didn't interfere. He knew that feeling, when you see a field you've grown yourself. When the earth responds to your care with a harvest. It's not pride, it's gratitude. He gave her 2 days of internal time, 48 hours on the internal clock, 14 seconds on the outside. She walked every centimeter of the 5 acres. She wrote 300 pages of notes. She classified 17 plant species not found in the Imperial Catalog. She drew a diagram of the irrigation system Ethan had built. She took soil samples from every plot. When she came back out, her eyes were ablaze. She said it was the greatest discovery in the last 100 years of Vallenheim botany. Ethan said it was just good soil and proper care. Hannah shook her head. She said he didn't understand, or was pretending not to. On the 45th day, an escort appeared on the horizon. Not mercenaries, not peasants. 4 horsemen in crested cloaks, silver and black. House Valar. A woman rode at the head of the group. Her back was straight. Her dark hair was tied in a bun. Her face was beautiful and cold as a winter lake. 24 years old, the heiress of an enemy house. Abigail Valar had arrived in person. The panel displayed Abigail Valar, age 24, level 11, class, aristocratic diplomat, health, 95%, loyalty to House Valar, plus 700, loyalty to Ethan Crow, minus 20. Secret mission, assess threat and potential for land acquisition, minus 20, enemy. She dismounted in front of Ethan and smiled. Her smile was flawless, professional, calculated down to the millimeter. She said that House Valar sent their greetings to the new lord of the northern wasteland, that surprising rumors had reached them, that they would like to discuss possibilities for cooperation. Every word was poison in a velvet glove. Ethan listened and smiled. Then he did something Abigail didn't expect. He didn't bring up politics. He didn't discuss the lands. He didn't haggle. He poured her some wine he'd made at the farm. 3 internal months of fermentation, 20 years of aging by internal time, from grapes that didn't exist in any cellar in the world. Abigail took the glass. She raised it to her lips. She took a sip and fell silent for a long time. Her mask cracked. It didn't fall off. It cracked. A single crack in her eyes. Abigail Waller grew up in a home where wine was a religion. Her family kept bottles aged for a century. The 1,000-year-old cellars were the pride of the family. She knew wine better than most people knew their own children, and she understood that the taste in her glass was impossible. No such wine existed. Nowhere. She asked where it came from. One word, quietly. No venom, no velvet, just a question. Ethan answered with a single word. Secret. The panel flashed. Observer's reaction. Category. Suppressed shock. Plus 200 points. Enemy status changed to observer. Abigail finished her glass. She stood up, said she'd be back, and left with an escort. But at the threshold she turned around and looked at Ethan with a look that, for the first time in 24 years, was devoid of calculation. Only a question. That evening, Ethan entered the farm alone. He needed to think. Abigail Valor was neither Roland nor Cassian's mercenaries. This was a different level. The House of Valor wants his land, and if they can't get it through diplomacy, they'll take it by force. He needs to be ready. He was walking through the 3rd acre, checking the crops, when he heard a sound. Quiet, like a whisper, or like the breath of a sleeper. He froze. The sound was coming from beneath the ground, from the far edge of the 5th acre, from a spot where he hadn't dug yet. Ethan moved closer. The soil here was different, darker, denser, as if something heavy lay beneath it. He dug with his hand. Half a meter in, he struck a stone, not an ordinary one, hewn with a pattern. Ruins. There were ruins beneath his farm. The panel flashed red. An anomaly detected. Level 0 ruins. 4% activation. Recommendation: do not disturb until internal time has accumulated. Ethan pulled his hand back. 4% activation. The system said that the ruins came to life more strongly the more internal time had accumulated. Abigail Vala returned 3 days later, without an escort, alone, on a single horse, without her coat of arms, wearing a hooded traveling cloak like a simple traveler. Ethan saw her from the top of the hill and realized this was no longer a diplomatic visit. It was a personal one. She dismounted at the camp gates. The camp had grown over the past few days. 3 barracks for the peasants, a training ground on the eastern slope, a storage shed for the harvest, a blacksmith shop, a primitive one, no blacksmith, just a shed with an anvil they'd hauled from the ruins of an old village 20 kilometers to the west. Abigail surveyed everything, silently, without any snide remarks, without any velvety smiles. She just looked. Then she walked over to Ethan and said she needed to talk, alone. They walked to the edge of the wheat field. 8 acres of golden wheat swayed in the wind. Abigail stopped and turned to him. Her face was different. Not the mask of an aristocrat, not the face of a spy, the face of a weary 24-year-old woman who, for the first time in her life, didn't know what to say. She said she'd sent the wine for analysis. The 3 best sommeliers at the Waller estate had tasted it. All 3 had come to the same conclusion. The grapes were of an unknown variety, aged for at least 20 years. Its quality surpasses everything stored in the Valor's 1,000-year-old cellars. One of the sommeliers began to cry. The second refused to give up his glass. The third wrote a 6-page letter in which he begged her to reveal the winemaker's name. Abigail paused. Then she said that her father, the head of the Valor house, had given orders to take the land from Ethan at any cost. That she had come here for the first time specifically for that purpose, to assess the situation, find weaknesses, and report back. Ethan nodded. He knew. The panel had shown him everything during his first visit. Abigail continued. She said she'd reported to her father that Ethan Crow was weak and that taking the land would be easy. Ethan raised an eyebrow. She said she'd lied. For the first time in her life, she'd lied to her family. Because when she tasted that wine, something inside her broke. Not in a good way. In the sense that she suddenly realized that everything her family took pride in, the 1,000-year-old cellars, the century-old vintages, the age-old traditions, all of that had been overshadowed by a single glass from a filthy farmer in a desolate wasteland. And if he was capable of doing that with wine, what else was he capable of? The panel flashed. Observer's reaction. Category, identity crisis, plus 150 points. Observer status confirmed. Ethan remained silent. He wasn't in a hurry, drink it. Abigail asked if she could stay, not as an ambassador, not as a spy, as a guest. Ethan asked why. She replied that she wanted to understand. He asked what exactly. She said she wanted to understand him, and herself alongside him. Ethan agreed. He gave her a room in the 3rd barracks, a former warehouse. Wooden walls, a thatched roof, a bed made of planks. For the heiress of a house that owned castles with marble floors, it was like lying down in the mud. Abigail didn't say a word. She put her bag on the bed and went out for dinner. Dinner was by the campfire. Ethan, Seora, Hannah, now Abigail. The 4 of them gathered around a single fire. Seora looked at Abigail as if she were a venomous snake that had been let loose in a chicken coop. Hannah was taking notes. Abigail drank her tea and said nothing. Ethan was baking bread from first leaf wheat. The silence was thick. Seora was the first to break it. She asked Abigail why the Valor house wanted land on which, until recently, nothing had grown. Abigail looked at her and replied that the Valars didn't need the land. They needed the one who had made it bear fruit. Seora placed her hand on her sword. Abigail didn't flinch. She said she hadn't come to fight. Ethan placed bread on the stone between them and said the bread was getting cold. Everyone fell silent and began to eat. The next 10 days were the most intense since their arrival at the wasteland. Ethan recruited and trained fighters. The conveyor belt ran non-stop. The 3rd slot allowed 3 people to be admitted at the same time. Seora trained inside. Ethan grew food inside. The farmers worked in the fields outside. Hannah classified the plants and kept records. Abigail watched. And she thought. On the 3rd day of her stay, she approached Ethan and said she could see his system. People entered a point on the hill and emerged as different people. She didn't know how, but she knew why. He was building an army, in days instead of decades. Ethan didn't deny it. He asked what she planned to do about it. Abigail paused. Then she said that if her father found out about this, he wouldn't send diplomats. He'd send an army. 1,000 fighters. The House of Valar could afford it. Ethan nodded. He asked if she would tell her father. Abigail didn't answer. She turned and walked away. On the 5th day, she approached Hannah. They talked for 2 hours. Hannah then came to Ethan, her eyes wide, and said that Abigail knew more about plants than half the Royal Academy, that her family had been collecting botanical knowledge for centuries, that the Wallars had archives describing herbs that had disappeared 300 years ago. Ethan took note of this. The Waller Archives, another resource that might come in handy. On the 50th day after arriving at the wasteland, Ethan had 68 fighters. The average level was 32. Darren led the way at 39. Ciora had reached 34. The farm had expanded to 8 acres. The 4th slot was unlocked. 4 at a time. Training speed doubled. But he still needed 32 more fighters in 40 days. And it was getting harder to find people. The nearest villages had already sent everyone who was ready. The more distant ones hadn't heard of him. Or perhaps they had heard but didn't believe it. The solution came from where he least expected it. On the evening of the 50th day, a wagon pulled up to the camp gates. Not a peasant's wagon, a freight wagon, a heavy one. Tools lay on the wagon, hammers, pliers, an anvil, a small portable forge. And standing next to the wagon was a woman, tall, broad-shouldered, drunk. Her red hair stuck out in all directions. Resting on her shoulder was a blacksmith's hammer the size of Kana's head. She looked at Ethan with glassy eyes and said her name was Jenny Hale, that she was a blacksmith, that she needed food and a place where no one would find her. The panel displayed, Jenny Hale, age 26, level 14, class, master weaponsmith, health, 68%, condition, alcohol intoxication, specialization, blade forging, skill, exceptional, wanted, reason, expulsion from the capital's blacksmiths guild on charges of violating the charter, true reason, gender, level 14, mastery, exceptional. Ethan looked at the hammer on her shoulder, at the calluses on her hands, at the burn marks from the forge on her forearms, at her eyes, veiled by alcohol. The eyes of a master who had been forbidden to work. He said there was food, there was a place to stay, and there was work. Jenny asked what kind of work. Ethan said he needed 100 blades, in 30 days. Jenny snorted. She said that one blade took at least a month's work. 100 blades in 30 days was the ravings of a madman. Ethan asked what if she had 5 years instead of 30 days. Jenny fell silent. She sobered up for a second. She looked at him with clear eyes, and she said that in 5 years she would forge not 100, but 200, and each one would be a masterpiece. Ethan nodded and invited her inside. Jenny entered the farm drunk. She came out sober. After 5 internal years, 34 minutes outside. She was 31 years old, 5 years of life in half an hour. But in those 5 years, she accomplished what no blacksmith in Vallenheim had ever done. Ethan supplied her with materials. The ore from beneath the 3rd acre of the farm turned out to be unusual. The panel classified it as chrono iron, a metal imbued with the farm's internal time. 3 times harder than ordinary iron, a quarter lighter, and with one property that Jenny discovered in her 2nd year. A master's brand stamped into chrono iron became indelible. No fire, no acid, no royal decree. The Hale mark on a chrono iron blade is eternal. When Jenny realized this, she stood by the anvil and was silent for 10 minutes. Then her shoulders began to shake. She was crying, silently, without tears. She was just shaking. Ethan didn't approach her. He stood by the garden bed and waited. When she calmed down, he came over and said that every blade she forged would bear her name. Forever. Jenny looked at him. She wiped her face with her sleeve and said one word. Thank you. Then she added, little one, and went off to forge. Over the course of 5 internal years, she forged 112 blades, swords, short and long, each with the Hale mark on the base of the blade, each made of chrono iron. Each was better than any blade in the kingdom's arsenal. The panel rated an average blade as a B+ grade weapon. The top 12 were rated A grade. The last blade Jenny forged was A+ grade. She named it First Spark, and she said it was for Ethan. Ethan took the sword. He didn't know how to fight. Agronomists don't fence. But the sword fit in his hand like a gardening tool. It felt natural. That's right. Jenny left the farm, and the first thing she did was ask for a drink. Ethan gave her some mint tea. She looked at the mug. She looked at Ethan. She laughed, loudly, like a man. Hannah jumped in surprise. Siora placed her hand on the sword. Abigail raised an eyebrow. Jenny took a sip of tea and said that in the 5 years she'd been with this guy, she hadn't had a single decent drink. Just tea. Tea in the morning. Tea in the afternoon. Tea in the evening. She said that if it weren't for the quality of the metal, she would have run away by the second month. Then she got serious. She looked at the 112 blades laid out on the ground, then at Ethan, and she said she needed a forge, a real one, outdoors, with a hearth, a canopy, and a supply of ore, because she wasn't going to stop at 112. Ethan nodded. There would be a forge. Ethan spent the next 20 days leading up to the review at a pace that would drive any normal person mad. He slept 4 hours a night, 2 hours outside, 2 hours inside the farm. Those 2 hours inside equaled 730 days, 2 years. Every night he lived through 2 years. He cultivated, he improved, he optimized. Every morning he went outside and continued working in the fields. The farmers saw that he wasn't aging. They saw that Siora aged 3 years in a week, that Jenny went in at 26 and came out at 31 in half an hour. They didn't ask questions. Not because they weren't curious, because Ethan paid fairly. He fed them well. He didn't hit them. He didn't humiliate them. In a world where lords took half the harvest and slept with other men's wives, a lord who took 10% and brewed mint tea for sick children was a miracle in itself. The other miracles could be overlooked. Recruitment continued. By the 60th day, Ethan had gathered 89 fighters, 11 short of 100. Sources were drying up. The villages were deserted. Everyone who wanted to and was able to had already come. Ethan was sitting on a hill weighing his options when Darren approached him. Darren was now a 29-year-old man with the face of a soldier and the eyes of a man who had spent 10 years inside a place where time flows like a river in flood. He said he knew where to find people. His brother had served in the garrison at Randall Fortress, the very fortress that had led to Siora's father's execution. The garrison was falling apart. They hadn't been paid for 4 months. The commander was drinking. Soldiers were deserting in groups of 2 or 3 every week. Darren said that if Ethan sent word, at least 15 men would come from there. Ethan looked at Siora. Randall Fortress, the place where her father had been a traitor. Siora stood 10 paces away and heard every word. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers gripped the hilt of her sword so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Ethan asked for her opinion. She was silent for a long time. Then she said that her father had been a good commander, that the fortress had fallen through no fault of his own, that he'd been framed. She didn't know by whom, she didn't know why, but she knew the verdict was false. Ethan nodded. He sent Darren to Randall with a letter, a simple one, no seals or fancy words. Work, food, shelter, fair pay, land for those who remained after their service, a 10% tithe. Darren rode off at dawn on the 61st day. He returned on the 64th. 17 men came back with him. Not 15, 17. Among them was one who made Ethan stop and reread the roster twice. An old sergeant named Goran, 52 years old, level 27, a veteran of 3 campaigns. He served under General Kim Tae-han, Siora's father. Goran saw Siora and froze. She saw him and froze. They stood facing each other in silence. Then Goran knelt on one knee. He said the general's daughter had grown up. Siora said he had grown old. Goran laughed. Then he cried. Then he laughed again. Then he told her. He told her that General Kim Tae-han hadn't been tried for losing the fortress. He'd been tried because he'd found something beneath the fortress, in the old cellars. Goran didn't know exactly what it was. It was just that the general would go down there alone. He'd come back pale. He'd write long letters to the capital. Then men in gray cloaks without coats of arms arrived. Quiet, polite. They spoke with the general behind closed doors. A week later, the fortress was attacked. The garrison wasn't ready. The gates opened on their own, from the inside. The general was arrested alive. He was tried in 3 days, executed on the 4th. The men in gray cloaks vanished. Goran said he'd been thinking about this for 6 years, and that the men in gray cloaks weren't from any order or house he knew of. Ethan listened and felt the panel in his head pulsing quietly. The men in gray cloaks. The Order of the Silent Hour. A secret cult that has been searching for the farm for 1,000 years. Siora's father found something beneath the fortress, an entrance to another farm, or ruins connected to the farm, and for that, he was killed. Ethan didn't say this out loud. It was too soon. Siora stood there, listening to Goran's story. Her face was stony, but Ethan could see the vein throbbing at her temple. He could see her fingers trembling on the hilt, how her eyes darkened, not from tears, from the rage that had been building for 6 years and had finally found an outlet. Her father wasn't a traitor. He was killed for what he found. She didn't know yet who had killed him, but now she knew that the answer existed. Ethan took Siora aside that evening. They stood at the edge of a wheat field, 10 acres as far as the eye could see, gold stretching to the horizon. He said he would find those who killed her father. Not now, after the review. When he had an army, influence, and time. He said it was a promise. Siora was silent. Then she nodded. Once, briefly, like the strike of a sword. Then she did something she hadn't done even once in all her years inside. She placed her hand on his shoulder. For a second. Then she withdrew it. The panel flashed. Siora's favor plus 15. A new relationship level. Ethan didn't show that he'd noticed. He just stood there, looking at the wheat. 17 new fighters from Randall entered the farm that same evening. 4 at a time, 4 slots each. 4 cycles. 6 internal years each. Goran refused to enter. He said he was 52, and that 6 years inside would turn him into a 58-year-old man. Ethan didn't press the issue. Goran was valuable even without leveling up. Level 27. 30 years of combat experience, knowledge of tactics, and absolute loyalty to his general's daughter. Ethan made him the field training instructor. Drill, discipline, teamwork. Things that can't be taught in solitary training sessions inside the farm. By the 70th day, Ethan had 93 fighters, 7 short of 100. And then Ethan did something he hadn't planned. He went to the farmers, the very farmers who worked his fields, who built the barracks, who mixed the clay and hauled the water. He gathered them in the evening around the main campfire, 30 people, men and women, old and young. He said he needed 7 volunteers, young, healthy, willing to spend years in training and emerge as soldiers. He explained the terms, honestly, without embellishment. Time, aging, risk. Silence hung over the camp. Then a young man of about 20 stood up. Bran's son. The very same Bran who was the first to lead people to the wasteland. The young man said he would go, because Lord Crow had given his family land, and the mint tea that had cured his younger sister's fever, and a tithe of 10%, and hope. He said that 5 years of his life was a small price to pay for all of that. 6 more stood up behind him. Ethan looked at them and estimated each one's age, all under 25, all healthy, all with eyes ablaze. He nodded, and in a single night he led them through the farm. 6 internal years for each. They emerged as soldiers, levels 28 through 33. Young, strong, with calluses from swords and plows, peasant soldiers, farmer warriors, 100 fighters, ready. 20 days until the review. Ethan stood atop the hill and looked down. The training ground. 100 men in formation, hail blades at their belts, simple uniforms, linen shirts, leather breastplates, no crests, no gilding, no pomp. But each of these 100 was worth 3 regular army soldiers. Average level 33, 12 fighters above level 40. Darren, level 47. Seora, level 38. Goran was at level 27, but with experience that couldn't be measured by numbers. Ethan looked at the panel. Total recognition points spent, 3,200. Current balance, 540. Farm, 12 acres. Slots, 6. Internal accumulated time, approximately 90 years. And that last number made him pause. 90 years of internal time. The ruins beneath the farm had awakened to 4% when 20 years had accumulated. Now it was 90. He entered the farm at night, alone. He walked to the far edge of the 12th acre, the spot where he'd found the patterned stone. The ground here had changed. Before, it had simply been dark. Now it glowed. Dimly, greenish, like phosphorus. Ethan dug with his hand. The patterned stone was still there, but now the pattern was pulsing. The panel flashed. Level 0 ruins, awakening 18%. Active elements detected. First fragment available for extraction. Caution advised. From 18% to 4, in a month and a half, something was growing. Something was waking up. Ethan reached out toward the pulsating pattern. The stone was warm, alive. He pressed it. The ground beneath him trembled. A crack ran from the stone to the center of the acre, and light poured out of the crack. Not bright, soft, green, like light filtering through the foliage in a summer forest. And then a voice came from the crack. Not the system's female voice. Another one. Young, sleepy. The voice of a girl talking in her sleep. She said 2 words. "You're late." Ethan pulled his hand away. The crack closed. The light went out. Silence. He stood in the darkness of the farm, and his heart pounded like Jenny's hammer on the anvil. Someone was there, down below, beneath his farm, beneath his acres, beneath his wheat and mint and chrono iron. Someone had been sleeping for 1,000 years and was waking up. 20 days until the review. Ethan didn't use them for training. The fighters were ready. 100 men, level 33 on average. Hale's blades, Seora's command, Goran's tactics. That would be enough to pass the review. But Ethan knew that the review wasn't the finish line. It was the starting line. After the review, people would take notice of him. Everything. The crown, the noble houses, the order of the silent hour. His father, his brother, and every one of them would want something from him, or would want to destroy him. He needed to prepare for what would come next, and he started with Abigail. On the 72nd day, he invited her for a walk through the fields. 14 acres of wheat stretching out before them, a golden sea beneath the gray northern sky. They walked in silence. Abigail had been quiet for the first 10 days at camp. She observed. She took notes. Not in a notebook like Hannah, in her head. She memorized everything. The fighters' names, the training schedule, the location of the warehouses, the patrol routes, Ethan's habits, the time he entered the farm, the time he left. She was the perfect spy, and she knew it. And Ethan knew it. And she knew that he knew. They walked across the field in silence. Then Ethan stopped. He pulled a bottle from his coat, a small one, dark glass, sealed with wax. He handed it to Abigail. She took it, turned it over in her hands, looked at the seal. There was no seal, no coat of arms, no name, just wax. She asked what it was. Ethan said it was her wine, not the Valor's wine, not the Wasteland's wine, hers. Abigail Valor's, personal. He'd grown the vineyard inside the farm over the course of 2 internal years, especially for this. He'd selected a vine that produced berries with notes that Hannah had described as Abigail's flavor profile. dark, deep, with a hint of bitterness, with a lingering aftertaste. Abigail looked at the bottle, then at Ethan, then back at the bottle. She broke the seal. She took a whiff. She closed her eyes. Her lips twitched. She said that the Valors take pride in their ancestors' wine, centuries-old vintages, millennia-old cellars. But all of that is foreign to her, inherited. Not a single Valor in 500 years had created their own wine. They had stored it, harvested it, hoarded it, but they hadn't created it. Ethan said this was her wine, not theirs. Abigail stood in the middle of a wheat field, heiress to a great house, diplomat, spy, her family's weapon, and she was crying, silently, without a sound. Tears streamed down her cheeks and fell onto the golden ears of wheat. She was crying for the first time in 10 years. The panel flashed. Observer's reaction. Category: destruction of defense mechanisms. Plus 300 points. Abigail's favor. Plus 30. Status changed from observer to loyal hidden. Loyal hidden. She hadn't openly switched to his side yet, but inside she already had. By this time, Jenny had built a smithy outside, a real one, with a stone forge, with an anvil made of chrono iron, with a canopy that the peasants had assembled in 2 days. She forged non-stop, not just blades, spearheads, horseshoes, door hinges, nails, everything a growing settlement needed. She forged and sang, rough soldiers' songs that made Hannah blush. Jenny paid no attention. She was happy. For the first time in years, a hammer in her hand, fire in the forge, metal that obeyed her, and the hail brand on every piece, indelible, eternal, hers. In the evenings, she would sit by the fire and call everyone Little. Seora, Little. Hannah, Little. Abigail, Little. Ethan, Little too. Seora gritted her teeth. Hannah giggled. Abigail pursed her lips. Ethan smiled. Jenny was older than everyone except Goran, and louder than everyone, including Goran. On the 75th day, Ethan entered the farm for a routine crop inspection. The mint had grown to monstrous proportions. 3 of the 12 acres were covered in mint. He trimmed the bushes and noticed that the ground at the far edge was glowing again, stronger than before. A green glow was seeping through cracks in the soil. The panel displayed awakening, 26%. New element detected. Crystalline structure at a depth of 4 meters. Recommendation: extraction permissible at current awakening level. Ethan hesitated. Then he began to dig. 4 meters down. The ground was soft. Too soft, as if it had been waiting. At a depth of 3 meters, he stumbled upon a wall. A stone wall, smooth, with patterns resembling tree roots carved into the granite. At a depth of 4 meters, the wall ended. Beyond it was a space, empty, dark, and in the center of that space stood a crystal, translucent, the size of a person. Inside the crystal lay a girl, small, thin, barefoot. Her dark hair was scattered across her shoulders. Her eyes were closed. She looked to be about 17 years old. Ethan stood and watched. The panel exploded with information. Sleeping subject detected. Classification: guardian predecessor. Stasis state. Duration of stasis approximately 1,000 years. Awakening at 26%. Full awakening upon reaching 100%. Current projection for full awakening: 4 to 6 months of external time at the current rate of accumulation. Guardian predecessor, 1,000 years. Ethan looked at the girl in the crystal. Her face was serene, like that of a person having a pleasant dream. A single tear was frozen on her cheek, stone cold, as if she had been crying the moment she fell asleep, 1,000 years ago. He reached out and touched the crystal, warm, like a stone in the farm, alive. And at that moment, her eyes opened. Not fully, just a slit, cloudy, sleepy. She looked at him through the crystal. Her lips moved. She said he was 1,000 years late. Gardener. Then her eyes closed. The crystal darkened. She fell asleep again. The panel flashed. Awakening, 27%, plus 1% from contact. Ethan stood in the underground chamber, breathing. He wasn't late. He had just arrived. But she had been waiting 1,000 years, and she called him the gardener. Not the Lord, not the farmer, the gardener. He climbed back up. He filled in the hole, not completely. He left a passage. He marked the spot with a stone. He left the farm. Night lay outside. The stars above the wasteland were bright and cold. Ethan sat on a hill and looked up at the sky. 1,000 years ago, someone created the farm. Someone was its keeper, a young girl. She fell asleep, or was put to sleep, and the farm waited for a new keeper. 1,000 years, until it found an agronomist from Iowa who'd fallen asleep at the wheel. Ethan didn't know why. He didn't know why it had to be him. He didn't know what would happen when the girl in the crystal woke up completely. But he knew one thing. She had called him a gardener, and he was a gardener. That was answer enough, for now. 15 days until the review. 100 fighters, 112 blades, 4 women who, for various reasons, found themselves by his side. 1 old sergeant, 30 peasants in the fields, 14 acres of wheat, 12 acres of the farm, and a girl in a crystal underground who had slept for 1,000 years, waiting for the gardener. Ethan finished his mint tea, bitter and warm, and began preparing for the review. Ethan spent the last 15 days before the review on something no Lord of Valenheim had ever thought of: food. He knew that the review was not just a display of fighters, it was a political event. Thousands of eyes, lords, marshals, courtiers, the royal family, and they would all be judging more than just swords and formations. They would be judging the man behind them. Ethan couldn't impress them with gold. He had no gold. He couldn't impress them with an ancient lineage. He was a bastard. He couldn't impress them with magic. He had no magic. But he could impress them with bread. He spent the next 10 internal years perfecting his culinary skills to a level this world had never seen. 3rd-generation first-leaf wheat. The grains were even larger. The flour was as white as snow. The bread made from it was soft on the inside and crispy on the outside. The aroma carried 20 steps away. Oil from flax seeds he had specially bred. Golden, thick, with a nutty aftertaste. Mint tea from the 4th line of selection. Its healing effect was tripled. A single mug relieved the fatigue of a day's march. The root of strength, ground into powder. Added to bread, it provided 12 hours of increased endurance without side effects. He was preparing a supply for the review. 1,000 loaves of bread, 200 jugs of tea, 50 bottles of wine. All grown on the farm, all from varieties that did not exist in this world. Hannah helped. She spent 2 internal weeks at the farm and cataloged every ingredient. She described their properties. She compiled recipes. Her little notebook turned into a book. 320 pages of notes. She called it The Catalog of the Northern Wasteland. Ethan said she was the author. Her name was on the cover. Hannah looked at him with an expression that the panel classified as absolute devotion, plus 30 points. On the 80th day, Ethan gathered everyone: Seora, Hannah, Abigail, Jenny, Goran, Darren, the squad leaders, all around a single campfire. He outlined the plan for the review. They would arrive on the 3rd day of the allotted 5. Not first, not last, in the middle. No pomp, no banners, simple uniforms, blades at their belts, Seora's formation, Goran's silence, and bread. Bread that they would hand out to anyone who approached, for free, to lords, to soldiers, to servants, to everyone. Jenny asked why they should feed those who had come to judge them. Ethan replied that once you eat someone's bread, you are no longer an enemy. You're a guest. And it's harder to execute a guest than a stranger. Abigail raised an eyebrow. She said it was the cleverest move she'd seen in 24 years at court. Feed the judges before they pass judgment. Ethan shrugged. He said that back home they call it PR. No one understood. Hannah jotted the word down in her notebook. On the 85th day, a royal messenger arrived. A young man in a coat of arms-adorned cloak, tired, with dust on his face from a 3-day ride. He handed Ethan a scroll bearing the royal seal. The bloody review was scheduled for 5 days later at the Field of Marshals near the capital. The presence of all lords with their forces is mandatory. Failure to appear or to field 100 fighters of level 30 or higher will be punished by the confiscation of lands and public execution. Ethan read the scroll. He looked at the messenger. A boy of about 16, skinny, hungry, with calluses from the rains on his palms. Ethan fed him bread with butter and mint tea. The messenger ate, his eyes widening with every bite. He asked what kind of bread it was. Ethan said it was ordinary bread. The messenger said it was the best food he'd ever tasted in his life. The panel flashed. Plus 15 points. Category: simple gratitude. A trifle, but trifles add up. The messenger rode off. Ethan began making preparations. 3 days' journey, 100 mounted fighters, 12 wagons of supplies, bread, tea, wine, weapons. Siora at the head of the column, Goran bringing up the rear, Darren, commander of the first 10, Jenny in a wagon with spare blades, Hannah with her notebook, Abigail. Abigail was a problem. She was the heiress of House Wallar. If she were seen alongside Ethan at the review, it would be a political statement. House Wallar is an enemy of House Crow. The Wallar heiress in the entourage of a Crow bastard is a scandal, or a declaration of war, or an alliance. Ethan asked Abigail if she was coming. She was silent for a minute. Then she said she was coming, but not in his entourage, separately. As an observer from House Wallar, officially, keeping her distance. Ethan nodded, sensible, for now. The column set out on the 87th day. 100 mounted fighters. Ethan bought the horses with money from selling wheat in the nearest towns. 14 acres of golden wheat brought in enough silver to buy the horses and fodder. First leaf wheat was selling for triple the price. Merchants were fighting for the right to buy it. Rumors of the miracle grain from the northern wasteland had reached the capital before Ethan did. A 3-day journey south. The landscape changed in reverse order. The rocky plain gave way to the steppe. The steppe turned green. Trees began to appear. Villages. People. People stopped and stared. 100 horsemen in plain uniforms without coats of arms, without banners, without gilding. But each had a sword at his belt that gave off a sense of something different. Even the untrained could sense the chrono iron, heavier than ordinary metal, denser, with a faint hum that could only be heard if you listened closely. Jenny sat on the wagon and grinned. She saw how people were looking at the blades, her blades, with her mark, indelible. On the 89th day, Ethan's column reached the Field of Marshals, the plain before the capital's walls. It was vast, kilometer upon kilometer of trampled earth, and camps were already set up on that land, dozens of them. Tents bearing coats of arms, banners, standards. The lords of Valenheim had gathered for the review. Ethan counted 23 camps, 23 lords, each with a contingent. The largest camp belonged to House Reinhardt, 300 fighters, silk tents, banners bearing a golden griffin. The second largest was the camp of House Crow, his father's house, 200 fighters, a tent bearing a black raven on a white field. Ethan looked at his house's coat of arms and felt nothing, empty, like the dead clay of the wasteland before he brought it to life. He set up camp at the far edge of the field. No tents, just simple canvas shelters, no coats of arms, no banners. 100 fighters pitched the tents in 20 minutes, in formation, silently. Not a single unnecessary movement. Goran gave orders in a quiet voice. Siora stood at the entrance to the camp and looked out over the field. Her eyes were counting. 23 lords. About 2,300 fighters in total, different levels. She told Ethan that most of the units were drawn from the city guard and the militia, levels ranging from 20 to 30. Few were higher, except for the Reinhardt house. They have professionals. Ethan nodded. He spent his first evening in the camp. He didn't go out. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't pay any visits. Instead, he set up a table at the camp entrance. On the table was bread, fresh and warm. The aroma swept across the field like a wave, golden butter, pitchers of mint tea. Free, for everyone. The first to approach was a servant from the Mervyn camp, then a soldier from the Turling camp, then another, and another. By sunset, there was a line of 40 people at Ethan's table. Servants, soldiers, grooms, cooks, people the lords don't notice. They ate bread and drank tea, and their faces went through the same stages as Inspector Rowland's. Disbelief, shock, gratitude. The panel worked non-stop. +10, +15, +8, +20. Small numbers, but dozens of small numbers added up to hundreds. By nightfall, Ethan had earned 400 points, just for bread and tea. The lords didn't know his name yet, but their servants already knew the taste of his bread. The morning of the review. The sun rose over the field of marshals and flooded the plain with cold autumn light. 23 lords lined up their troops. 2,300 warriors in ranks, banners, coats of arms, gilded armor, plumes on helmets. Each lord fielded the best he had, the most expensive armor, the shiniest swords, the most beautiful horses. Ethan lined up his at the very end, last of all. 100 men, linen shirts, unadorned leather breastplates, hail blades at their belts. No banners, no coat of arms. They stood in silence. The royal tribune towered over the field. Marshals in red robes, advisors. Observer lords who had brought more than 100 warriors and were not afraid of inspection. And in the center of the tribune, a chair, empty, for the Queen Mother, Celeste von Ashwind, regent to the minor king. She hadn't arrived yet. Or perhaps she had arrived but hadn't come out. Or perhaps she was watching from a closed box. No one knew. The review began with a roll call. Each lord stepped forward before the tribune and presented his unit. The marshal checked the number of fighters. The royal assessors measured the levels. The procedure was long, tedious, formal, house after house. Reinhardt, 300 fighters, average level 34. The marshal nodded. House Mervyn, 120 fighters, average level 29. The marshal frowned. The cutoff is 30. Mervyn wiped the sweat from his brow and began to explain that he had 30 elite fighters who would make up for the average. The marshal listened with a stony face. House Crow. Ethan's father stepped forward. 200 fighters, average level 32. Good numbers. His father stood straight. His face, as always, was as stern as oak. Cassian stood beside him. Golden hair, a white cloak, a smile. He stood as if these were his fighters, his achievement, his house. The marshal nodded. House Crow had passed the test. Cassian turned toward the podium and bowed, gracefully, rehearsed. The crowd rustled. The golden child. The lords representing the houses filed by one after another. By noon, 3 remained. 2 minor lords from the south, and Ethan. The minor lords had passed, barely. Exactly 100 fighters, all exactly level 30, as if measured with a ruler. They'd scraped by. The marshal nodded without enthusiasm. And finally, Ethan Crow, Lord of the Northern Wasteland. Silence fell over the field like a curtain. 2,000 people watched. Ethan walked from the far end of the field toward the stands, alone, without an entourage, without a standard bearer, in a plain shirt, with the sword first spark at his belt. Cassian stood by his father's box and smiled, broadly, anticipatingly. He had been waiting for this moment. Bastard. 0 fighters, 0 weapons, public disgrace, execution, the end. Duke Crow watched his approaching son. His face betrayed nothing, as always. The marshal looked at Ethan. He asked where his squad was. Ethan stopped. He turned toward the far end of the field and whistled. A single whistle, short, sharp. People emerged from behind the tents at the far end, in formation, silently. 10 ranks of 10, 100 men, step in step, breath in breath. The hail blades at their belts hummed with the quiet hum of chrono iron. Seora led the way, back straight, eyes forward, sword on her left hip. Behind her was Darren. Behind Darren came the rest. Goran brought up the rear. They marched across the entire field, past the camps of other houses, past tents filled with silk and gold, past soldiers in gilded armor, 100 fighters in linen shirts without a single ornament. And the field fell silent. Not because they were beautiful, not because there were so many of them, but because they were different. Every step in sync, every breath in unison, every gaze fixed on a single point. This was not a militia unit recruited in a week. This was not a city guard dressed in borrowed armor. These were people who had lived side by side for years, who had trained until they bled, eaten at the same table, and shared the same tea. Years that weren't on this world's calendar, but which were etched into every movement of every fighter. The formation stopped in front of the grandstand. Seora gave the command. 100 blades left their sheaths at the same moment. A single sound, a single clang of metal cutting through the air. 100 blades pointed skyward. Chrono iron caught the sun and reflected it, causing the grandstand to flare with silver light. The marshal blinked. The evaluators began their measurements. First fighter, level 34. Second, 31. Third, 36. Fourth, 32. Fifth, 38. The evaluator looked up. He glanced at the marshal. The marshal nodded. Continue. 10th, 35. The 20th, 41. The 30th, 33. The evaluator was counting faster and faster. His hand holding the pen was trembling. The average level rose with every 10. 33. 34. 35. When they got to Darren, the evaluator stopped. He double-checked, checked again. Level 47. He looked at the marshal. The marshal stepped forward and checked it himself. 47. For a fighter from the northern wasteland, from a place where not even grass grew 3 months ago. The marshal looked at Seora. He checked. Level 38. Discipline 85. He checked Goran. 27. A bit low, but 3 decades of combat experience radiated from the old man like heat from a furnace. The squad's final average level, 35.4. Higher than the Reinhardt house, higher than any lord on this field. Silence reigned on the field of marshals. 2,000 men were silent. Cassian stood by his father's podium. His smile vanished. His face turned ashen. His legs buckled. He grabbed the railing of the podium to keep from falling. His eyes darted from Ethan's formation to his father and back again. Duke Crow looked at the formation, at the blades, at Seor at the head, at Ethan, who stood before the marshal as calm as a man who had come to show off his harvest at a country fair. The Duke held a goblet of wine. His hand trembled. The goblet tilted. Wine spilled onto the marble of the grandstand, red on white. He didn't notice. The marshal turned toward the grandstand. His voice was steady, but there was a ring to it that hadn't been there all day. He announced that Ethan Crow, Lord of the Northern Wasteland, had presented a squad of 100 fighters with an average level of 35 and 4/10. The squad was accepted. The rank was confirmed. A pause. Then the marshal added that, based on the results of the review, Lord Crows had achieved the highest average level among all those presented. Recommendation for an award. The field gasped. It didn't shout. It didn't applaud. It gasped. The collective exhalation of 2,000 people at once. Cassian stood as white as a sheet. His hands were shaking. His eyes were empty. He looked at Ethan but didn't see him. He saw the end. The end of his game. The end of his superiority. The end of everything he had built his life on for 23 years. The bastard had won. The panel before Ethan's eyes exploded. A mass reaction. 2,000 spectators. Categories: shock, disbelief, admiration, fear, envy, hatred, respect. Plus 5,000 recognition points. Rank updated. Lord Gardener. New arch unlocked. Ethan stood before the podium and looked up. At the marshal, at the advisors, at the Queen Mother's empty chair. And then he saw her. Not in the chair, behind it, in the shadows. A woman in a dark dress. 28 years old, dark eyes, thin lips, a dagger with a ruby on the hilt at her waist. Celeste von Ashwind, the Queen Mother, Regent of Vallenheim. She stood in the shadows and looked at Ethan. Her lips moved. She spoke words that no one but Ethan could make out from such a distance. But the panel read her lips. She said, "So you are the one he's been waiting for." Ethan looked at her. She looked at him. 50 meters and 2,000 witnesses stood between them. But at that moment, there were only two people on the field, the gardener and the queen. Then Celeste stepped back into the shadows. She vanished, as if she had never been there. Ethan turned to his squad. Ciora was looking at him. There was something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Not respect, not loyalty, pride. Jenny sat on the wagon, grinning so widely it looked as if her face would crack. Hannah wrote in her notebook so quickly that the pen tore through the paper. Abigail stood among the onlookers from House Villar. Her face was a mask, but her hands were clutching a small, dark glass bottle. His wine. Her wine. Ethan raised his hand. 100 blades returned to their sheaths. A single sound. The formation turned and marched off. In silence. Without bows. Without speeches. Without a single unnecessary word. They had come. They had shown what they could do. And they had left. Like a farmer who brought his harvest to market, laid it out, received an appraisal, and went home. Behind him, the field buzzed. The lords whispered among themselves. The marshals conferred. Soldiers from other units watched the formation in linen shirts walk away, unable to comprehend what had just happened. And Ethan walked toward his camp, thinking of the woman in the shadows, of her words, the one he had been waiting for. Who was he? The late king, Celeste's husband. He had been waiting for the gardener. How did he know? And why wasn't Celeste surprised, but merely confirming something she had known all along? Questions. Too many questions. And too little time for answers. Because a messenger in the royal colors was already galloping toward his camp. Young, pale, with a seal on the scroll. The messenger dismounted and handed over the scroll. Ethan broke the seal. The text was brief. Queen Mother Celeste von Ashwind wishes to see Lord Ethan Crow in the small hall of the palace. Tomorrow, at dawn. Alone. Unarmed. Ethan rolled up the scroll. He looked at the messenger. He nodded. The messenger rode off. Ciora approached. She said it was a trap. Ethan said it might be. Ciora said she would go with him. Ethan said no. The scroll says alone. Unarmed. Ciora pressed her lips together. She looked at him with that gaze that made the favor meter flash favor +5. Then she turned away and went to sharpen her sword, just in case the trap worked. Ethan sat down by the fire. All around him people were celebrating. The fighters were drinking mint tea and eating bread. Darren was telling the story of how the marshal had double-checked his level 3 times. Goran sat quietly and smiled. Jenny was cackling and slapping the nearest fighter on the back so hard that he nearly fell into the fire. Hannah was writing. She was always writing. Ethan looked at them all and thought. 90 days ago, he had been standing on a bare hill with a sack of turnips. Now he had 100 fighters, a blacksmith, a herbalist, a spy who had become an ally, an aristocrat who had become almost a friend, an old sergeant with 30 years of loyalty, a lieutenant who had lived 10 years in a single month, and a girl in a crystal underground who had slept for 1,000 years, waiting for the gardener. And tomorrow, the queen awaits him. She knows more than she says. Her late husband was just like Ethan, a stranger who'd wandered in, and he left her a diary that reads, "One day, a gardener will come. Help him, or kill him." Ethan finished his tea, cold, bitter, and he went to bed. Tomorrow, a new game begins. The small hall of the palace turned out to be a room the size of a barn. Stone walls, narrow windows, one table, two chairs. On the table, a pitcher of water and nothing else. Celeste von Ashwind sat at the table and waited. Ethan entered at dawn, unarmed, without an entourage, wearing the same linen shirt he'd worn at the review. The guards closed the doors behind him. He heard the bolt clang into place. A heavy sound. Final. Celeste was looking at him. Up close, she looked older than she had from a distance. Not because of her age, it was from exhaustion. Dark circles under her eyes, fine lines around her lips, wrinkles not from laughter, from clenched teeth. 28 years old, 5 of them on the throne. Alone, without a husband, without allies, with a son who fears her and advisors who hate her. She didn't offer him a seat. Ethan sat down on his own. She raised an eyebrow. Then she smiled, subtly, like a crack in porcelain. She said that the last person to sit down in her presence without an invitation was her husband. Ethan remained silent. She continued. She said that her husband, King Albert von Ashwind, had died 3 years ago. Officially of a fever, unofficially of poison. She doesn't know who did it. She only knows why. Because he knew too much. About Fermac. About the Guardians. About what lies dormant beneath the earth. Ethan didn't move. She pulled a book from under the table. A small one. Leather-bound. Worn. She placed it on the table between them. She said it was her husband's diary. That he'd kept it in secret. That it contained things not found in any of Wallenheim's archives. She said the last entry was made a week before his death, and it contained a single sentence. "One day a gardener will come. Help him or kill him. There is no third option." Ethan looked at the book, then at Celeste. He asked why she hadn't killed him. Celeste poured water into a glass, took a sip, set it down. Every movement was calculated, precise, economical, like Siora's blows. She said that killing useful people is wasteful, and Ethan is useful. His fighters are the strongest at the review. His wheat is the best in the kingdom. His tea heals the sick. His blacksmith forges blades that no other household possesses. You can only kill a man like that if he's dangerous. But is he dangerous? A question she asked not with words, but with her eyes. Ethan replied that he was a farmer, that he grew things, wheat, people, wine, that he didn't want the throne, he didn't want power. He just wants to be left alone and allowed to work. Celeste listened. Then she laughed, quietly, bitterly. She said her husband had said the exact same thing, word for word, and that he, too, was not of this world. Ethan froze. She knew. The late king was an outsider, and Celeste knew it. She said that Albert had told her everything in their 3rd year of marriage, that he was from another world, that the farm had brought him here, that he was meant to become a guardian. But he failed. The farm rejected him. He was a warrior, not a gardener. He could conquer, but he couldn't cultivate, and the farm shut itself off. She went into stasis, along with the one who was inside her. Albert became king. He tried to find another way. He searched for new guardians. He found the Order of the Silent Hour and realized they were looking for the same thing, but for a different purpose. The Order didn't want to awaken Firma. The Order wanted to destroy her. Because Firma is an anomaly, a glitch in time, a hole in the fabric of the world. And if what sleeps within were to be awakened, the world might change completely, forever. Albert didn't have time to decide what to do. He was killed before he could. Celeste fell silent. Ethan sat and thought. The late king, a stranger from another world, a warrior, not a gardener, rejected by Firma, killed by the order of the silent hour, or by someone connected to them. Firma had waited 1,000 years. She found Albert. He wasn't the one. Firma waited some more. It found Ethan, an agronomist, a gardener, a man who knows how to cultivate, not conquer. A second attempt. He asked Celeste what she wanted. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said she wanted peace. For her son, for the kingdom, for herself. The empire of the Sun Eater is advancing from the east. Their armies never age. Their magic is bloody and ancient. Valenheim won't survive the war. There won't be enough soldiers. There won't be enough time to prepare. There won't be enough of anything. If Ethan can raise armies in a matter of days, then he is our only hope. Ethan was silent. Then he reached for the book. Celeste didn't stop him. He took the diary. He opened it to the last page. The handwriting was small, hasty. The ink had smudged in some places. The last entry. One day the gardener will come, help him or kill him. If he can grow what I couldn't, the world will have a chance. If he can't, the world will get another empty farm and another 1,000 years of waiting. There is no third option. Forgive me, Celeste. I wanted to be a gardener, but I'm a soldier, and soldiers don't grow things. They only cut them down. Ethan closed the diary. He set it on the table. He looked at Celeste. She was waiting. He said he needed time. She said there was no time. The empire of the Sun Eater would cross the eastern border in 6 months. He said he had the farm. Time was the only thing he had in abundance. Celeste looked at him. Then she nodded. She held out a small ring to him, silver, with a ruby, the royal access ring, a pass to any door in the kingdom. She said it was an advance, for his trust. Ethan took the ring. He stood up. He bowed. For the first time during the entire conversation, not because she was the queen, because she had been alone for 5 years, and she was still standing. He turned toward the door. Celeste called out to him. He stopped. She told him to be careful of the order of the silent hour. They had killed her husband. They would kill him too, if they found out that the farm had awakened. Ethan nodded. He left. The doors closed. He walked through the palace corridors, lost in thought. The order of the silent hour, a secret cult, 1,000 years old. They killed the king. They killed Seora's father. They want to destroy the farm, because they're afraid of what might awaken. Mireille, the girl in the crystal, the previous keeper, the one for whom Firma exists, the one who called him the gardener. Ethan returned to camp at the field of marshals. Seora was standing at the entrance, a sword at her belt. Her eyes were wary. She asked if he was alive. He said he was. She asked what the queen wanted. He said she wanted to talk. Seora looked at the ring on his finger, the royal ruby. She said nothing, but her jaw clenched so tightly that Ethan heard her teeth grind. He didn't explain. Not yet. Ethan returned to the northern wasteland 4 days later. The wasteland had changed. During the 3 months of his absence, the peasants, led by the carpenters and Goran, had transformed the barren hill into a settlement. 20 houses, barns, a stable, a marketplace, a well, a log wall around the perimeter. Not a fortress, but no longer a camp. People kept coming. Rumors of the review had spread throughout the kingdom. The Lord of the Wasteland had fielded his finest contingent, the Lord who takes 10% of the tithe, the Lord whose bread heals and whose blades sing. By the time Ethan returned, 180 people were living in the wasteland. Peasants, artisans, families of fighters, children. Ethan stood atop the hill and looked down. 3 months ago, there had been nothing but barren clay here. Now there were 20 acres of wheat, a settlement, people, life. He had built this, just as he would have cultivated a field, seed by seed, person by person. But there was no time for satisfaction. 6 months until the Empire's invasion. 100 fighters aren't enough. He needs 1,000, 3,000, an army. And not just soldiers, commanders, tactics, supplies, logistics, everything they teach over decades at military academies. He hadn't had decades out there, but inside. Ethan entered the farm, 12 acres. He spent 2,000 points on an expansion, 20 acres, then another 1,000, 25. The farm grew, new land, new resources. On the 16th acre, he found an ore vein. Not chrono iron, something else. The panel classified it as temporal quartz, a transparent crystal that glowed from within with the same green light as the ruins. Jenny took a sample. She tried forging it. The result exceeded expectations. An alloy of chrono iron and temporal quartz produced a metal that the panel rated as S rank, the first S rank in Ethan's arsenal. Jenny named the alloy chronosteel. A single blade made of chronosteel was, in terms of performance, equivalent to 10 ordinary swords. Lightweight, durable, with a blade that never dulled, and with one property that made Jenny drop her hammer. Chronosteel cut through magical shields. It simply passed right through them, like a hot knife through butter. In a world where mages spent decades creating defensive barriers, a sword that ignored magic was a weapon of strategic threat. Ethan ordered Jenny to forge 12 blades from chronosteel, for commanders, for the best of the best. Jenny forged them for 3 years. Each blade was a masterpiece. Each was given a name. The first blade, Morning Light, went to Ciora. She took it in her hand and froze. Then she ran her finger along the blade. No blood came. The blade would not cut living flesh without its owner's intent. It cut only what the owner intended. Ciora looked at Ethan. She said nothing. She simply nodded. Once. But her eyes were wet. For the first time. Alongside the weapons, Ethan was solving the problem of manpower. He needed people. A lot of them. Fast. The solution came from Celesta. 2 weeks after his return to the wasteland, a royal courier arrived. With him were 500 men, young, healthy, volunteers from the Royal Reserve, untrained, levels 1 through 5, but young, 18 to 20 years old, perfect material for the farm. Celeste's letter was brief. Here are the people. Here's the time. Make soldiers. I believe you can do it. Don't let me down. Ethan unlocked 10 slots. The cost was astronomical. 5,000 points. He spent everything he'd saved up during the review and afterward. His balance was wiped clean. But 10 slots meant 10 people at a time. 500 volunteers divided into groups of 10, 50 cycles. Each cycle lasted 8 internal years. On the outside, each cycle lasted 55 minutes. 50 cycles amounted to 46 hours on the outside, 2 days of non-stop work. Ethan hadn't slept for 2 days. Ciora was training inside. Goran was helping. Darren was commanding the second group. Jenny was forging. Hannah was counting and documenting. Abigail was coordinating supplies from the outside. The flywheel was spinning at breakneck speed. At the end of the second day, Ethan stepped out of the farm. He was shaking from exhaustion. His eyes were red. His hands were trembling. But behind him stood 500 fighters, average level 34. 200 of them were above 36. 30 elite fighters at level 40 and above, armed with hail blades. 12 commanders with chronosteel. An army, a real one, raised in 2 days. Hannah handed him a mug of tea. Ethan took it. His hand was shaking so badly that he spilled half of it. Hannah took the mug back. She brought it to his lips. She fed him, like a child. Her eyes were red. She, too, hadn't slept for 2 days, but not because of work, because she was afraid for him. The panel flickered faintly. Hannah's favor rating, +10. Ethan smiled, and he lost consciousness. He slept for 18 hours. When he woke up, Ciora was sitting next to him. She was cleaning the morning light, silently. He asked how long he'd been asleep. She said 18 hours. He asked what had happened while he was asleep. She said nothing. That Goran had set up patrols. That Darren was conducting drill. That Jenny was forging and singing. That Hannah was writing. that Abigail had sat by his door for 3 hours and left without saying a word. Ethan sat up. His head was spinning. He looked at the panel. 512 fighters, including the first 100. 12 commanders. The farm, 25 acres. Points, 0. Ruin of the ruins, 39%. 39. It was growing faster. Every training cycle inside the farm accumulated internal time, and the more time there was, the faster whatever lay beneath would awaken. Mirai. He had to visit her. In the 4th month after the review, Cassian struck. Not with swords, not with mercenaries, with paper. He filed a lawsuit in the royal court challenging the legality of the ownership of the northern wasteland. The land transfer document had been forged. The Duke's seal had been counterfeited. The bastard Ethan Crow has no right to the land or the title. All property is subject to confiscation. All his fighters are to be disbanded. Ethan himself is to be arrested for fraud and impersonation. Ethan learned of this from Abigail. She ran into his barracks at dawn, her face as white as chalk. Her sources at court reported that the lawsuit had already been accepted and that Cassian wasn't the only one behind it. The House of Valar, her own house, her father. The Valars had provided lawyers. They'd bribed 3 judges. They'd bought witnesses who would confirm that the seal was forged. Everything had been prepared over the course of months. While Ethan was training the army, Cassian was waging a war on paper. Ethan listened in silence. Then he asked Abigail one thing. She had known all along. Abigail lowered her eyes. Yes, she knew. Her father had written to her. She hadn't replied. She hadn't told anyone. But she hadn't warned Ethan either, because part of her was still a Valar. Part of her was still afraid of her father. Part of her still didn't know whose side she was on. Ethan looked at her. A small, dark glass bottle still hung from her belt. His wine. Her wine. He didn't reproach her. He asked what she was going to do now. Abigail stood there in silence. Then she straightened up, lifted her chin, looked him in the eye, and said she would renounce it. Publicly. Her last name. From the house. From the inheritance. From everything. Because for 24 years, she had been the Waller's weapon, and she was tired of being a weapon. She wanted to be herself, whoever that might turn out to be. The panel lit up. Abigail's favorability, plus 50. Status changed to full ally. Ethan nodded. He said the renunciation would have to wait. First, they needed to settle the lawsuit. And he had a plan. The royal court was scheduled for a week from now. An open hearing. Lords, judges, the public. Cassian was confident of victory. He had the documents, witnesses, the Valar lawyers, money. Ethan had arrived in the capital with 3 people, Seora, Hannah, Abigail. No army, no swords, no show of force. The courtroom was packed. 300 people, lords, courtiers, onlookers. Cassian stood at the prosecution's podium, golden hair, a white cloak, the smile of a victor. Beside him were 3 lawyers from the House of Valar. Behind them stood Duke Crow, his father, a face of oak, eyes of stone. He looked past Ethan, as always. The judge read the charges: forgery of a document, forgery of a seal, unlawful possession, fraud. Cassian called his witnesses, 3 of them, former servants of the Crow estate. They swore they had seen Ethan forge the seal, that the seal was made of a different color of wax, that the document was not written in the Duke's hand. Cassian spoke eloquently, confidently, with pauses in all the right places. The crowd listened, nodded, shaked their heads. Ethan waited. When Cassian finished, the judge asked Ethan what he had to say in his defense. Ethan stood up. He took a scroll from his bosom, the very one, the original deed of land transfer. He placed it on the table in front of the judge. Then he took out a second scroll, the royal decree, bearing the seal of Celesta von Ashwind, the seal of the Queen Mother, the regent. The decree was brief. The royal chancery confirms the authenticity of the deed transferring the northern wasteland to Ethan Crow. The Duke's seal has been verified by the royal keeper of the seals. Any claims to ownership of the northern wasteland are deemed to be challenges to the Crown's decision. The courtroom fell silent. Cassian turned pale. The Valar lawyers exchanged glances. A claim against the Crown's decision is treason. Direct, unambiguous. Cassian had just accused Ethan of forging a document that the Crown had confirmed as genuine. That meant Cassian had accused the Crown of complicity, or of incompetence. Both constitute treason. The judge read the decree. He reread it. He looked at Cassian, then at the Valar lawyers, then back at the decree, and he closed the case. 3 words. The claim is dismissed. Cassian stood at the podium. His face went through a series of expressions. White, gray, green. He opened his mouth, closed it. His hands were shaking. He turned to his father. Duke Crow was looking at Cassian. For the first time in 23 years, Ethan saw an expression on his father's face. Disappointment. Not in Ethan, in Cassian. The golden child had failed, publicly, loudly, disgracefully, and he had exposed the entire House of Crow to accusations of attempting to undermine the Crown's decision. The Duke stood up, turned around, and walked out of the hall. He didn't say a word, not to Cassian, not to Ethan, not to anyone. He simply stood up and left. Cassian watched him go, and in his eyes was something Ethan hadn't expected to see. Not anger, not hatred, fear. A little boy whose father had failed to protect him for the first time. Ethan didn't press his advantage. He gathered his papers, nodded to the judge, and walked out of the courtroom. Ibage was waiting for him in the hallway. She said the Valar lawyers were in a panic, that her father would be furious, that this meant war between the houses, open war. Ethan said the war was already underway. It was just that now everyone knew. Abigail nodded. Then she pulled a scroll from her bosom, written in advance, a declaration of renunciation of the House of Valar. She asked Ethan to be a witness. Ethan looked at her, at the scroll, at the small bottle of wine on her belt. He said he would. Abigail signed the declaration. Her hand didn't tremble. Her voice didn't waver. She spoke the words of renunciation evenly and clearly. I, Abigail, formerly of the Valar house, renounce the name, the house, and the bloodline. I am free. The panel flashed. Plus 400 points. Category: absolute loyalty and a break with the past. Ethan handed her a quill. She signed her name. Then she raised her head. She looked at him and smiled. Not a mask, not a calculation. The smile of a person who had just cast off 24 years of others' expectations. Heavy, suffocating, dead. She was free. For the first time. The war with the Sun Eater Empire began in the 6th month. Not in 6 months, in the 6th. Sooner than Celesta had expected. Sooner than Ethan had prepared for. The messenger arrived at the wasteland in the middle of the night. The horse beneath him was ridden to the point of foaming at the mouth. He said the eastern border had fallen. 3 fortresses in 2 days. The Empire's army doesn't fight like ordinary soldiers. Their fighters don't age. Their wounded rise again. Their commanders use bloody rituals that suck the life out of the earth and pour it into the soldiers. The land behind them turns black and dies. Ethan stood on the hill and listened. Then he looked at the farm, at his fighters, at Siora, who was already organizing squads, at Jenny, who was running toward the smithy, at Hannah, who was gathering medical supplies, at Abigail, who was sending messengers to the Waller's former contacts with an offer of an alliance. 512 fighters. A lot for the Lord of the Wasteland. Not enough for a war against the Empire. He needed more. And he needed to solve the problem he'd been putting off for 4 months. Mirae. Her awakening had reached 62%. He visited her every week. He'd sit by the crystal. He'd talk to her. She didn't answer. But the crystal grew warmer each time. Its glow intensified. Flowers sprouted through the stone floor around the crystal, without seeds, without watering, on their own. Myrae could hear him, and she responded in the only way she knew how, with sprouts. Ethan made his decision. He would enter the farm and stay inside as long as it took for the awakening reach 100%. He explained this to the team. Siora said it was madness. Years would pass inside. He would be alone, without support, without sleep in the normal sense. Ethan said he wouldn't be alone. Myrae was there. The ruins were there. The answers were there. Hana asked how long it would take on the outside. Ethan did the math. At the current rate of awakening, he'd need to accumulate about 300 internal years to reach 100%. 300 years inside, 34 hours outside, a day and a half. Abigail said that a day and a half in war is an eternity. Ethan said that a day and a half without him wouldn't change a thing. But what he brings back from inside could change everything. Jenny struck the anvil with her hammer and said that if the kid wants to spend 300 years in a pit, he should at least take some decent food with him instead of his eternal mint tea. Ethan smiled. He walked into the farm, alone. 300 internal years. He hadn't lived through them all. The keeper's body didn't age, but his mind grew weary. He slept. He woke up. He worked. He cultivated. He studied the ruins that were revealed layer by layer. The underground chamber turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it were halls. Beneath the halls were corridors. Beneath the corridors was a library, an ancient one, 1,000 years old. Scrolls in a language no one knew. But the panel translated them, slowly, in fragments. The history of the keepers. 7 farms across the continent, 7 keepers, each bound to their own land. Each cultivates time. Each one nourishes the world. 1,000 years ago, the Order of the Silent Hour decided that the farms were a threat, that time cannot be cultivated, that it is unnatural. They killed 6 guardians. They destroyed 6 farms. The 7th survived. Mirai hid it. She put herself into stasis along with it. She sealed it in stasis. And she waited. For 1,000 years. For a gardener who could awaken it and grow the world anew. Ethan read the scrolls and cultivated. The farm's 25 acres grew to 50, then to 100. He bred varieties that were supposed to be impossible. Wheat that grew without water. Trees that bore fruit every month. Grass that healed broken bones in an hour. A root that provided immunity to poisons for a day. 20th generation selected mint. A single cup of tea made from it could restore a person from a wound that would normally be fatal. By the 200th internal year, the awakening had reached 90%. The crystal surrounding Mirai had thinned. She was breathing. Her fingers twitched. The flowers around her bloomed constantly, never wilting. Ethan sat nearby and waited. In the 250th year, he saw a crack form in the crystal. By the 300th year, the crystal crumbled. Mirai fell forward. Ethan caught her. Small, light, warm, alive. She opened her eyes. Dark, deep, ancient. The eyes of a being who remembers 1,000 years. In the body of a 17-year-old girl. She looked at Ethan, then at the farm around her, at the 100 acres of fertile land, at the wheat, at the mint, at the trees, at the flowers. Her eyes filled with tears. She said he had grown all of this. Ethan said yes. She said he was the real one, a real gardener, not like the one who came before him, not a warrior pretending to be a farmer, but a real one. She stood up, her bare feet on the black earth, and the earth beneath her feet was covered with flowers, white, blue, golden. The flowers spread out from her in circles, like ripples from a stone thrown into water. Mirai raised her hands. She closed her eyes, and the farm shuddered. The ceiling of the sky split open. Light poured in from above. Not sunlight, something else. Green, ancient, the light of the farm. Real, complete. The panel before Ethan's eyes exploded with information. Awakening, 100%. Predecessor Guardian activated. Chronos Farm switching to full mode. All restrictions lifted. All systems accessible. Signal detected. Second farm. Coordinates, another continent. Status, stasis. Guardian absent. Signal detected. Third farm. Fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. All in stasis. All without keepers. 7 farms. 6 destroyed. Now awakening. Because the 7th has come to life and is calling the others. Myray turned to Ethan. The flowers beneath her feet glowed. Her skin glowed from within with a soft green light. She said thank you for raising her, and that now it was her turn to him. She touched his chest with her palm. Warmth flowed into him. The panel showed the changes. Ethan's level was first, became undefined. Class was farmer, became guardian. Ethan looked at his hands. They glowed with the same green light. He could feel the farm, all of it, every acre, every seed, every root, as if it were a part of himself. He could feel the people outside. Siora sharpening her sword, Hannah writing in her notebook, Jenny by the horn, Abigail standing at the farm's entrance, waiting. He could feel the earth, all the earth of the wasteland, every stone, every grain of sand, and he could feel the 6 other farms, far away, sleeping, waiting for their gardeners. He stepped out of the farm. 34 hours had passed outside, a day and a half. War raged in the east, but silence reigned over the wasteland. Siora was waiting at the entrance. She saw him, and her eyes widened. He had changed. Not on the outside, on the inside. Something within him had become different, deeper, quieter, like soil into which a seed had been planted and had sprouted all the way to the bottom. The war ended in 17 days. Not because Ethan turned out to be a great commander. He wasn't a commander. He was a gardener, and he did what he knew how to do. He cultivated victory. The army of the Sun Eater Empire numbered 40,000 soldiers. Their bodies did not age thanks to bloody rituals. Their mages sucked the life out of the earth and poured it into the soldiers. The earth behind them turned black and died for decades. They swept through Valenheim like locusts. 5 fortresses fell. 12 villages were burned. Valenheim's regular army retreated. Ethan had 512 fighters. It wasn't enough. But he had the farm, fully stocked, without limits, 100 acres, and the power of the keeper. He did not create another 1,000 soldiers. He did something else. He grew a wall. On the eastern border of his lands, Ethan placed his palms on the dead earth. The power of the keeper surged through him into the soil, and the earth responded. Roots rose from the depths, thick, ancient, the roots of trees that had never grown above ground. They intertwined to form a wall, a living wall, 20 meters high, 5 kilometers long, a wall of roots and vines. It grew, 1 meter every hour, 20 meters every day. It spread out in all directions, encircling the territory, blocking the approaches. The Imperial army approached the wall and stopped. Their mages tried to burn it down. The wall wouldn't burn. They tried to poison it. The wall absorbed the poison and grew thicker. They tried to chop it down. The severed branches regrew in seconds. The Imperial commanders were furious. They threw 2,000 soldiers at the wall. The soldiers began climbing up, and then the wall began to fight back. Vines grabbed at their legs, roots knocked swords from their hands, branches entwined them and flung them down, not killing them, binding them, immobilizing them. 2,000 Imperial soldiers lay at the foot of the wall, bound by living vines. Not a single one was dead. Ethan stood atop the wall and looked down. Mirai stood beside him, barefoot, with flowers in her hair. She was smiling. She said that the wall was a good thing. But walls don't win wars. Ethan nodded. He knew. The wall was buying time. Time for the real strike. Siora delivered the strike. 500 of Ethan's fighters flanked the wall, hail blades made of chrono iron, 12 commanders wielding chrono steel. Chrono steel sliced through the Empire's magical shields like air. For the first time in decades, the Empire's mages faced weapons that ignored their defenses. Their shock was absolute. Darren led the first squad, level 47, a chrono steel sword named Dawn. It cut through the line of Imperial mages like a knife through butter. Not killing, disarming, severing staffs, slicing through artifacts. The Empire's mages drew their power from bloody rituals. Without artifacts and staffs, the rituals ceased. Without the rituals, the Empire's soldiers began to age, rapidly. Years that had accumulated over decades crashed down upon them in a matter of minutes. 20-year-old fighters became 40-year-olds. 40-year-olds became 60-year-olds. The army of the Sun Eater Empire was aging before their very eyes. Not because of Ethan's magic, because of its own. The time that had been taken away was returning. Kana stood behind the battle line and documented it all. Page 312 of the Northern Wasteland Catalog. Section, Military Botany. Subsection, The Use of Living Structures in Defensive Operations. She wrote and wept at the same time, not out of fear, out of the realization that she was witnessing an event that would go down in history. Jenny did not participate in the battle. She stood by the field forge, sharpening blades. Every fighter returning from battle brought her a sword. She inspected them, sharpened them, returned them. Her hands did not tremble. Her brand was stamped on every blade. Hail, indelible, eternal. Abigail coordinated the rear. She used all the contacts she had left from House Valor. Former merchants, former spies, former diplomats. People who remembered that Abigail Valor was smarter than her father, and who were willing to work for Abigail without the surname. Supplies, intelligence, liaison with the other lords. She did what she did best. She led. Only now, not for House Valor, for herself, and for him. On the 7th day of the war, Goran brought reinforcements. 300 volunteers from the surrounding villages. Untrained, not leveled up at the farm. Just people with pitchforks and axes. They came because the Lord of the Wasteland fed them bread. He treated their children with mint tea. He took a tithe of 10%. And now he was defending their land with a living wall. Ethan didn't send them into battle. He stationed them behind the wall, to feed the fighters, to repair equipment, to tend to the wounded. Every very person in their place, every seed in the right soil. On the 10th day, the Imperial General requested negotiations. Ethan stepped out from behind the wall alone, unarmed, without armor, in a linen shirt, with the sword First Spark at his belt. He didn't take it off, because First Spark was a part of him, like a hand, like a heart, like the farm. The Imperial General was a tall man in black armor with a golden mask of the sun on his face. He removed the mask. Beneath it was the face of an old man, a real old man, not made young by rituals. Wrinkles, gray hair, tired eyes. The rituals had stopped working. Ethan understood. The farm wasn't just his territory. It influenced time around it. And the stronger the farm, the stronger the influence. The Empire's bloody rituals worked because they stole time. The farm cultivated time. It was impossible to steal time near the farm. Time returned to those from whom it had been taken. The general said his army was dying, not by the sword, by old age. Soldiers who had been 20 were now 60. Officers who had been 30 were now 80. They were literally growing old while standing in formation. He asked for a truce, a retreat, a chance to get the survivors out. Ethan looked at him, an old man, weary, defeated not by weapons but by time. Ethan asked one thing. Why had the Empire invaded? The general paused. Then he told the truth. The empire of the Sun Eater is dying. The bloody rituals devour not only the time of others, they devour the Empire's land. The fields are dead. The forests are dead. The rivers are poisoned. They did not come to Valenheim to conquer. They came to survive. because their own land has been killed by their own magic. Ethan was silent for a long time. Then he said one word. All right. He offered terms. The empire would retreat. It would cease the bloody rituals, completely, forever. In return, Ethan would give them seeds, first-leaf wheat, mint, the root of strength, everything needed to revive the dead land. And he would teach them to grow, not to fight, to grow. The general looked at him as if he were mad, then as if he were a saint. Then he took off his glove and held out his hand. Ethan shook it. The war ended with a handshake on a field of death between a living wall and an aging army. Not with victory, not with surrender, with a deal. Seeds for peace, like at a market, like on a farm. Celeste found out about the peace 3 days later. A messenger brought her reaction. A short letter, 2 words. You did it. And a small postscript. Come here, we need to talk. About the diary, about the Fermas, about what comes next. Ethan returned to the wasteland. The settlement had grown even more. 500 people, houses, streets, a market where they traded first-leaf wheat and mint tea. Jenny's blacksmith shop, from which the sound of a hammer rang out day and night. Hannah's infirmary, where they treated patients with decoctions and infusions from the catalog. Siora's training ground, where recruits kicked up mud. Formerly dead land, formerly the northern wasteland, now alive, now real. Ethan stood atop the hill, the very same hill where he had stood 9 months ago with a sack of turnips and a rusty axe. Mirai stood beside him, barefoot, with flowers surrounding every footprint. She looked down at the settlement below, at the people, at the fields, at the smoke rising from the chimneys, at the children running between the houses. She said he had built more than she could have imagined. Ethan said this was only the beginning. Mireille nodded. She said that 6 other farms were waking up. 6 places across the continent. Each needed its own keeper, its own gardener. Ethan asked where he would find the 6 gardeners. Mireille smiled. She said he didn't need to look. The farm was calling, just as it had called him, just as it had called Albert before him. She would find them herself. All he had to do was cultivate the place where they would come. Ethan looked down. Seora was training fighters on the training ground. Her movements with the morning light were like a dance, deadly and beautiful. Hannah was sitting on the infirmary porch, writing. Page 400 of the catalog. She looked up and waved at him. A tiny figure with a huge notebook. Jenny stood by the forge, a hammer on her shoulder, her red hair standing on end from the heat. She saw Ethan and shouted that if the little one didn't come down for dinner, she'd personally drag him down by the ear. Abigail sat at a table under the awning, sorting through letters from 3 houses that wanted to trade with the wasteland. On her belt sat a small, dark glass bottle. His wine. Her wine. She had never opened it. She kept it, as proof that she was herself, and not a Waller. Garan stood at the gate, inspecting the guard. Old, calm, unwavering. 30 years of loyalty that had found a new recipient. Darren was leading the morning roll call, 29 years old, 10 of which he'd spent inside the farm. A peasant who'd become a lieutenant. A seed that had grown into a tree. Ethan looked at them all, at each one, at his people. Nurtured, not conquered, not bought. Nurtured, like wheat, like mint, like wine. Each in their place, each in the right soil, each having realized a potential the world had deemed impossible. He recalled the thoughts he'd had on the very first day, when he stood on this hill with a handful of dead clay in his hands. You sent an agronomist to a wasteland. Do you even realize who you've just insulted? Now they understood. All of them. The father who wouldn't look up. Cassian waving from the balcony. The nobles laughing in the great hall. Inspector Roland, who came to humiliate them. They all knew now who they'd cast out. But Ethan wasn't thinking about them. He was thinking about the land, about the seeds, about the 6 farms waiting for their gardeners, about a world that could be grown, not conquered, not bought, grown. Mirai stood beside him. The wind ruffled her hair. The flowers at her feet swayed. She said that 1,000 years ago the world had lost its gardeners, and she thought the world would perish. But it didn't perish. It was simply waiting, like a seed in dead soil waits for rain. Ethan nodded. He bent down, took a handful of soil, rubbed it between his fingers. Black soil, fertile, alive. The same soil that 9 months ago had been dead clay. He smiled. He opened his fingers. The soil fell back to the ground, and immediately a sprout broke through it. Green, slender, stubborn, reaching toward the sky. Ethan turned and walked downhill, toward his people, toward his farm, toward his world. The gardener was walking home.